Hello everyone, welcome to Whatifissei was imprisoned by Rias Gremory Part 2. Chapter 8. Azazel's training method. Underworld, Dragon Territory, Citri Peerage. Alcom and Sona is not here. Tsubasa and Tomo attack it from the front. Seijo support them as best as you can with your sacred gear. Momo and Ryo you'll stay here with me and prepare supportive magic and attack magic. Yelled Tsubaki as her wings popped out of her back and she took to the sky. Yes, Vice President. The group yelled out. Momo and Ryo flew up next to Tsubaki, one preparing an attack spell and the other defense spell. Tsubasa and Tomo went full force ahead towards the gained dragonic snake, Tsubasa reeling her fist back before sending towards the underside of the snake. Much to her shock she felt the recoil of the hit as she was sent a bit away as the scars of this dragon was tauter than she had thought. The same could be said for Tomo as she tried to slice its side, only for her sword slid off the scars. They both realized they needed more strength or had to hit the same area in a certain order if they wanted to leave any damage on its body. Sanji summoned his sacred gear, forming a little snake's head on his left arm. He shot it off and lashed onto one of the dragon's spikes on its head. Got it. He yelled out, which ended with him having the dragon focusing on him. It raised its tail a bit before launching it off towards Sanji, who luckily enough got time to see it and just barely dodged it. Don't got it. He yelled out again as he lied flat on the ground before standing up and moving to another post-ion. The two girls who had tried attack earlier had used the slight distractions that Sanji made to make a quick plan of attack. They both agree that Tsubasa should try to break its underside scars as they should be softer. Hopefully they was. She got about 3 hits off with her using full power for each one and her arm going numb for split second with the amount of recoil she felt for each hit. She had just landed the third which seemed to have bent the scars a bit in, but she did though fail to notice the 1 meter thick tail that swayed her away to the side. Tomo had luckily dodged out of the way and the pros to attack with a piercing strike which had not just slid off. She had pierced its armor and not just by a few centimeters but by at least half of her sword. Here. Fire here. She yelled out to Tsubaki as she took her sword out of the wound she had made and ran off to help Tsubasa. Good job you two, now Momo. Ryo. Fire everything you have there. Tsubaki yelled out as she fired off a massive streak of lighting. Momo and Ryo both fired off regular expulsion magic. All 3 shots hit their target, making the ground around it blow up as well as a few more of its scars. They could even hear a roar of pain. Then they felt something else, which they hadn't expected. They felt dread, an unnatural amount of it. Then they found out why, as it seemed like the dragon they had just attacked had begun to raise its power. When it stopped Tsubaki realized they wouldn't stand a chance without the other peerage behind them. She looked behind her hoping to see them coming towards them to help but instead find them all on the ground and the other dragon still standing without a single scratch. She couldn't think straight as she landed on the ground from how weak she felt at the sight of these giants coming towards her. The ground shook for every step the purple one took while it carved in from the weight of the dragonic snake, one coming from behind her. They both reeled their heads back, preparing another breath attack until a figure flew down from the above. Okay, that's enough you two. A manly voice yelled out, sounding a bit disappointed. Tsubaki looked up to see who was their saver, only to see Azazel flying in the air talking with the purple dragon. Next to him flew both Rias and Sona, both looking worried before they both flew down to each of their peerages. Tsubaki barely understood what was going on as she had just felt so much dread that she thought she was going to die. Tsubaki? Can you hear me? Are you okay? Sona yelled as she was shaking Tsubaki's body, whom barely reacted to it, much less did any of her other teammates. All besides Tsubasa and Sanji for some reason. President, what the hell is this? Why were we sent here and why are these dragons not killing us right now? Asked Tsubasa as she was helping Tomo over to the other members of Team Citri, she had not been affected like the others. Before Sona could answer that, Azazel had flown down between both peerages with the 2 dragons moving over together next to each other. Well, I have to say, this was a pure show of how easy your masters have been with your training. It surprised me that Team Rias only lasted that long and that Team Citri didn't do any more planning outside of the basics. Azazel spoke, taking away people's focus from the dragons and towards his comment about training. This was training. What kind of training involves near-death? Yelled Sanji angrily, only for him to get 2 might and deep laughs from behind him where the 2 dragons stood. He turned to face them with an angry expression as he felt dragons had it easier, being born with all the power anyone could want. What do you 2 lizards find so funny? He yelled, not realizing how rude he was being. Luckily for him, these dragons didn't have too shallow pride, or at least they didn't right now, as his words didn't mean much to them. It's just that you believe training to become stronger comes with pain, suffering and sacrifice. That is not a good mindset for one with a dragon-type sacred gear. Explained the dragonic snake in a voice Sanji felt sounded familiar, but he didn't care enough to think too much about it. And so what if I do? He yelled back, this time receiving wise words from the purple and older one based on the sound of his voice. Then your next month or so with the hatchling here will be pure hell. He half joked, but it sounded more like a threat than a joke. Luckily before Sanji could ask any more question, Kiba asked a big question. Who are these two dragons? Normally no normal dragon would ever help with training devils or any race other than their own. Kiba asked, making both Azazel and the snake one smirk. Azazel flew up into the sky again, being just around the two heads of the dragons behind him. But question, well let me introduce to you, Tannen the blazing meteor dragon king. And his best purple to date, your very own, Issei Hijishiki. Azazel announced, to the shock of everyone, but Sona and Rias as they had green-lighted this idea. Both of the peerages stood, with shocked faces. Mouth open wide and eyes too, that kind of shock expression. Issei just slipped out his forked tongue, as he smiled with a mischievous grin. Tannen just stood and watched the many devils feeling compelled outmatch, as one would when they met a dragon king. Do you mean to tell us, we just fought a dragon king? And Surived? Asked Akeno as she hadn't expected to be alive with this new information. Why would you not be alive? I was only allowed to use 10%, while Issei could only use 20% at most, even though you did fail to do that. Tannen said, as he turned towards Issei with angry look. Issei bent backwards with his long neck body, looking a bit scared under the gaze of his master. Well they became just a bit too much, so I thought why not give them more of a fight. Besides they almost broke one of my scarls. That must speak for how much of a Tannen hit him on the hit, making Issei look down as he whimpered a bit. Sorry, it won't happen again. Was all he said as he kept his head down. Tannen just kept looking angrily at him. The many people on the ground and Azazel found this interaction to be quite entertaining, but before any of them could speak or gossip about it, Issei sent them all a death glare. Anyways, let's pack this whole thing up for now and get you kids back home. Training will begin tomorrow. Azazel said, as the two peerages and dragons all nodded. Time skip, underworld, Citri territory. Inside the main mansion of the Citri family, in one of the many gooseed rooms that had been prepared for the youngest daughter servants, lied Sanji on an emperor-sized bed. He was exhausted after the near-death battle they had earlier, along with the looming comments about this being part of their training. He also felt angry at the way Azazel had talked about the way Sona trained him and the others, but he couldn't argue that he was wrong. Sona, just like Rias, were very nice and less intent on them training too hard, which was nice for the lazy Sanji, but it also made him feel crap for not being strong enough to even land a single hit on some enemies. He twitched at the thought of that word, enemies. What if that battle earlier had been real? Would Issei still have taken them on with restraint? Or would he have them all killed within seconds? It terrified him to think about it, so much so that he didn't notice Sona walking inside his room. Sanji, can we talk? Her sudden and soft voice caught him off guard, as well as her sudden appearance. He fell back on his back, thankfully the bed was soft as a cloud. Are you okay? Is this a bad time? Sona asked again, as she was slightly convinced, as she had watched Issei fight them and felt bad for them, that they had fight him. Sanji sat up straight a bit after, and shook his head. No, I am fine, President. What do you want to talk about? He asked, his tone was a bit embarrassed by his previous actions. Just call me Sona for today, okay? I just wanted to check on you all, seeing as Issei went too far and has made Port Tsubaki scared of almost every painting containing a snake or serpent. Sona revealed, much to the surprise of Sanji. He had noticed she was a bit more out of herself, especially at dinner, as they had eel. She had just looked at it with worry eyes half of the time. Oh really? I think I am okay, Never mind, it's nothing, I am fine. Sanji said, his voice having a slight bit of doubt in it, which Sona picked up on. She sat down next to him, looking at him worriedly, almost like an older sister. Are you sure? I had thought you have been the one most affected by the overwhelming dread he poured out. She asked as her worry was clear for him to hear. He sighed, then took in a deep breath. I am afraid of the thought of what if that battle too was real. It felt so one-sided when he began to attack with a bit more effort. But still every one of his attack felt lacking. Not in power, but more in how much it meant to him to win. Like he didn't see us as a threat. Sanji spilled out, much to the surprise of Sona. She understood what he meant. Her peerage and herself are more on the strategy side, meaning they work towards a few heavy attacks, with lighter attacks as build-up. But this time it didn't really go how they had planned. She had told Issei to learn their patterns, their strengths and weakness. But he either didn't care or didn't see them as enough of a threat. She had to give it to him. They weren't even when that attack hit, it had done any major damage as they had thought, it had only made him anyonate. I understand, Sanji. But now you know the cap you and everyone else have to try to fill up, or else it will always stay like this. Sona sounded reassuring as she said that, like she believed they could reach that level of power. She did. She had to or else realized her way of training them wasn't helping them, but only holding them back. Her peerage may have lost a battle, but she fears that she lost them the battle before it even began. I will president. I will become stronger, even if I have to lose a limb. I'll go through Azazel training regime if it force for you and everyone else. Sanji yelled as he had for some reasons gotten hyped up by Sona's small comment. Sona couldn't help but smile at her pawn's drive to grow stronger, but she also had a worried mind as she knew who was going to train him. I'll just let him have this for now, he'll find out tomorrow. Thought Sona. As Sanji had somehow forgot that Tanning had mentioned who was going to train him earlier. The next day, early morning. You're fucking kinding me, I am going to be trained by that Fizco, screamed Sanji as he was running down the halls away from his mentor, Issei, who was flying after him so that could get to the training area he had lent from Tannin. Yes, not get your ass back here or else. Roared Issei as his features slowly turned more draconic while still having a few humane traits in there. The others had been sent off a few minutes ago, as Azazel had sent them off to only he knows where. He had been at the Gremory territory earlier to send them off on their training as well, now all that was missing was Sanji. Which didn't take long in fact, as only a few seconds, a few more corners, and the sound barrier being broken, and Sanji was finally being flown away with by Issei in his huge draconic hands. Geez, you have already mastered at least one of Ritra abilities, and it just had to be the worst one. Issei grumbled as he carried him off, or rather the remains of Sanji, as he looked more like a caught prey than whatever Azazel had thought this was going to be. But that comment had gotten Sanji a bit of hope up, as he felt a bit of a drive if he had already mastered one of Ritra's abilities. Which one, if I might ask? He asked with a dumbfounding interested, to which Issei answered with any ornate tone. His ability to run away from his duties. His most worthless ability in my opinion. Issei said, then continued to fly towards his destination with Sanji, just feeling like deading in his claws. This is going to be a long month. Why did I say yes to this again? Was it just to beat some kids? Have I really fallen that low? Yeah, sounds like me. I'll just make the most of this, somehow. I just that bastards don't try anything. Issei thought as he subconsciously sped up, making Sanji feel the skin on his face try to rip off him. Needless to say, the trip over there was the worst and most painful trip in Sanji's whole life. He would from that day on, relied on his own wings instead of dragon ones. Chapter 9. Understand your powers. Unexplored territory of the underworld, out in a vast and dry upland of hard dirt, sand and rocky terrain. Where the only alive things are unmatched monsters and the remaining demons of a long-forgotten time. Where winds that can rip almost any being apart in a matter of seconds. Sat two people on the top of the tallest mountain in the whole territory. Both seemed to not mind the constant winds, rip their cloths apart slowly, or the growls of hungry monster below them. Of course they didn't, as why would two of the world's strongest race care enough to notice those beneath them? One of them was a young man, as far as his looks went at least. He had long and almost tentacle-like hair, which was both blonde and black, each color per each of the many tentacles of hair. His eyes were as strange as his hair, as his left eye was golden, while the right was black. He wore a rather military-like cloths, or at least what would look like military cloths. His companion was a small girl, with long black hair and dull grey eyes. She had chest open and exposed, but at least she covered her breast with tape. They both just sat there still, and none caring about the literal hundreds of hungry creatures below them, trying their best to climb up to them and eat them. At least they did until a sudden spark of dark lighting struck down through them, killing them all in a matter of seconds. Annoying pests. Why can't I ever just have moments worth of quiet? Asked the man, as he sighed in annoyance, making the small girl look over at him with expressionless face. I know you enjoy their struggle, ultimate evil dragon. The small said, making the male look annoyed as he hated how she seemed to know everything, but still turned his head towards her. Yeah. Whatever you say, Snake. What do you want from me? You don't normally talk with me. Or any of us? Asked the man, with a slight bit of curiosity. The girl just looked out over the horizon, seeing the vast earth that the creatures that had just died, as well the man next to her calls home. I talked to Issei the other day, he's been released again. She said with not much change to her tone, but a rather creepy smile, or whatever this smile was. The man looked on with interest, as a slight smile formed on his face. Oh really, my nephew is out again? Maybe I should visit him. The man spoke as he stroked his chin. He then looked over at the small girl again, as another question arose in his head. So what did you two talk about? Did he say yes to joining us? The man asked with a small bit of excitement in voice, even moving his upper mostly towards the girl next to him. She rather than answer, just formed a happy smile instead, then towards him. He finally let me become his godmother. She said with joy, much to the man's dismay. His face literally froze, as he had hoped something more important had happened. Then something else sprung alive in his mind. Who said you could be my nephew's godmother? He turned his whole body towards, as an uncle-like rage built up inside him. Who said you could be his godmother? I am the only family his needs, you old bag of snakes. the man yelled. His yelling was so powerful that the wind stopped for a few seconds before returning. It even made the little girl be pushed away by a millimeter. Her happy smile returned to her emotional ones along with her whole aura. I asked him and he said yes. So your input is hereby unveiled. He is now my son, even if he is over 20. The little girl proudly stated, much to man's dismay. His form began to slightly shift as his body began to grow in ways that made him less human, but more draconic. He stood proudly over 30 meters tall, but got stopped by his sense, as he sensed the very person he and the little girl had talked about. They both looked towards the directions of where they could feel the power. The man also slowly returned to his more human form and stood next to the little girl, who changed her form to that of a young woman. It seems he is back in the underworld. What's it been like over a century? Asked the man, as the woman nodded along with his statement. Shouldn't we go see him? I haven't seen him in ages. I want to see my nephew. The man tried to jump over the cliffside, but the woman caught him by his hair, making Yelp a bit in pain. No, don't go yet. I can feel he is surrounded by devils. Let's wait for now. She spoke to the man, whom sensed the same as she had just spoken of, and stood calmly next to her again. Fine, but I will try to see him at least once in the following month. I am sure he had missed me being inside that cage. The man spoke as he crossed his arms, as he just looked at the direction where Issei was at. I understand, I want to see him too, Crom. The woman spoke, as she and the man both stood still there for a bit longer, before both of them teleported away to God only knows where. Underworld, Dragon Territory. Underground in the Dragon Territory lies a long and connect mining systems from when devils still owned the area. Some of the mines are still in use, but it's under strict observation of underground deviling dragons and tannin. But that's mostly on the borders of the two territories. But somewhere else, in a much tighter space compared to the others, where only really devils or smaller dragons can move, could be heard screams of fear. A young blonde-haired reincarnated devil was running from his life, passing by torches, tunnels, railroads and old signs. But why was he running? Well, because a rather large snake was chasing after him. It had been for about an hour now, where it would sometimes spit fire at him, making him have to dodge or turn a corner and hope that snake would have trouble with a sudden turn. But it didn't, as it seemed to enjoy his struggles. Sanji was sweating all over, his face was beginning to become bright red by how much air was inhaling, then right after exhaling. He had his sacred gear out, but he had hardly used it, as he didn't see how he could use it in this tight space. He looked behind him to check if the snake was following him, only to find the tunnel to be empty. He scowled down, as he saw this as a good chance to catch his breath, or maybe he just relax a bit. But he soon felt that this was a mistake, as a wet sensation touches the back of neck. He slowly and frighteningly turned his head around to be met with the giant face of Black Snake, with its giant purple slit eyes staring him down. He closed his eyes, as he had accepted his lose, even opening his arms up as a sign he was beat. The snake began to expand its mouth, enough so it could swallow him up in one bit. But instead it just spat out a gallon of spit on him, which was slightly toxic. You failed. Said the giant snake, as Sanji opened his eyes feeling the toxins enter his body. I know. But why did you have to poison me? You. No, not everyone. Has his high. Posion. Posio. Sanji fell over, but lucky he had been caught by Issei, as he had turned to his human form. He carried him over to the side of the wall, putting him down and up against the wall. I know, but it's part of the training I planned for you. He said quietly, as he too sat down next to him. He just stared off down the long and almost maze-like tunnels, wondering what in the world the devils could have ever even found here, as this entire place was literally nothing more than dirt and more dirt. Sanji's sacred gear on summon itself, which had for some reason caught Issei's attention. He noticed that where it had been a few seconds earlier, now have a bit of mark on it, which was something he had hoped for. It had a faint black mark of circle, with a droplet of water inside it. It seems like it's working faster than I expected. Maybe that bastard got himself a compatible host this time. Issei spoke out loud, as he also noticed another black mark faintly form itself on the side of Sanji's head. It looked like a heart, but it held a small ripple that went down through it, making it look like a broken heart instead. It made Issei's faint smile turn to a frown, just at the side of it. Really compatible. He said angrily, as he stood up again going down one of the tunnels. Leaving Sanji by himself. I just hope the kids is going to be alright with that mark. He said as he went down the tunnel, before releasing a powerful wind down all the tunnels, making all of the touches go out. Making the entire cave a dark abyss, where funnily enough only Issei was giving off a bit of light. It came from his back, this purple light. It came from 6 or 8 places on his back. He pulled off his shirt, which would have shown off his normally muscular build, but instead it only showed these others' marks on his stomach. They didn't shine as much as the others, but they could still be seen. He kept walking down the tunnel, having his vision adjust to it as he went. His many marks began to light up more and more. His body began to grow in size as he began to take on his more draconic and humanoid form. The lights from his marks began to die down as his eyes instead light up in a purple light. He kept walking like this until only his eyes had light in them. He then stopped as the sound of chain was heard, then more. He looked around him, trying to see them or find them. But he didn't see them or find them anyway near him. He began to walk forward again until he felt something holding on to him. That's when he heard the chains again. He looked on his legs and arms. He saw the many chains on him, holding him back, not letting him walk forward nor anything else. He didn't seem to be worried as he had tried this before, long ago. He then heard 2 sets of footsteps coming from behind him. He didn't look behind him, he didn't want to look behind him. He knew this sense by heart even if he had only seen once before. It played in his mind every time he thought of her, his mother. He felt a warm and cold touch on each of his shoulders. On his right was a cold and dark hand with the looks of a claw. While on his left shoulder was a warm and yellow hand that looked like a human woman's hand. "Can't we do this another time? I am really not in the mood for this," he said quietly as the scents kept on. The 2 people he hated and loved the most showed up on each of his sides. One was a tall dark figure with draconic features all over his body. His father Vritra in his human form. While the other was human figure with fair skin, beautiful blonde hair and a kind smile. His mother. He didn't know her name, he just knew she was beautiful. Then a sudden black and purple egg appeared before him which the 2 figures went over towards. Both of them held a hand on it as they both smiled lovingly towards it. "I don't want this right now, can't we just do this another time please?" Issei said with a bit of whimper as he knew what would happen next. But the scents kept playing as the 2 figures stood next to each other, holding on to the other with loving care. Nothing was being said until a sharp scream was heard from the woman. Issei closed his eyes as he didn't want to relive this moment. Screams, blood gushing out and the sound of broken and crushed bones could be heard all around him. Even worse was the sound of his father eating the broken body of his mother. Then the only part of the sense when they said something came and the words he hated the most from his father came out. "We love you so much, our little Ritara." Issei's eyes shot open as his face and the ground met. He looked up to see he was back in the tunnel again, no chains, no blood and his father and mother were both gone. He sighed weakly as he knew he was going to have a tough time for the next few days. "Hey Issei. Where are you?" He heard the voice of Sanji, which made he realized he had probably been out for at least an hour. But at least he could now distract himself with training Sanji. He turned himself into a snake again, not as big as before, but still larger than your average snake. He crept down the darkened tunnels as quietly as he could. Pining down Sanji as the fool was still calling out for him, not realizing this was part of his training. He found the idoid even faster by the fact that he had made a small flame in his hand as a source of light. He slid her up behind him, quietly as to not disturb him or make him aware of his presence. Then he blew out his light, making the poor boy stiffened. Now, who said you could make your own light?" Issei asked in an evil way, before begging the next bit of Sanji training. "Time skip. Okay, that's enough for today. Good work, you did better than I had expected. You even got one of the marks," Issei said as a half-dead Sanji was lying on the ground padding, as the horrors of his training was still fresh in his mind. His whole body was mixture of cuts, bruise and toxin, which he had luckily grown a resistance to. "And since you did so well on your first day, we can take it a bit easier tomorrow," Issei said, making Sanji sigh in real life. "But do continue on the meditating training, you'll need to have clear and problem-free connection with Vritra," Issei said, as less of a high point, but more like a loss. Sanji just shrugged it off since 1. He barely knew the whole deal between Vritra and Issei. 2. Was none of his bussiness. But he is human and feels he has to ask just be sure Issei is okay, at least that's what his heart is telling him to do. So? Issei. How does it feel to be related to a famous dragon? Sanji realized that he could have said it better or just not said at all. It felt like the best thing to ask in his mind, but now that he said out loud, he realized it didn't sound like he cared about Issei's problem. "Oh sorry. I didn't mean. Sorry, forget I said anything." Sanji tried but felt like he was only digging his grave deeper and even deeper if he tried to defend himself. "It feels. I don't know. I have never wondered about that before. How does it feel?" Issei said, much to Sanji's relief and surprise. Sanji tried to sit up, managing to support himself up against one of the tunnel's walls. "Really? I thought most people in your situation would have wondered about something like that once." Sanji asked, his half-dead body screams of pain being muted by his human curiosity and fellow empathy for his fellow human. Issei sat down as well, the mood just made him feel like this a sitting down and talking moment. He let a bit of his draconic features show, like his eyes and his longer purple and black mixed hair. "I might have at one point, but I just forget or something. I don't know, but I guess I feel a slight bit of pressure to be like him, I guess. You know how like dragons are seen as monsters and such? Issei asked, making Sanji nod his head as he was one of those people. Well, for us dragons everyone just look like pitiful little pests. But the thing is, both sides, as in both dragons and the little pests both pressure each other in some way to act these ways we see them as. Do you understand? Issei asked, as his harsh and pitiful gaze had disappeared and the gaze of a friend had taken its place. It made Sanji feel less worried, as it seemed like Issei was being a bit open with him. He nodded slowly, as he did understand what he meant, he was just not really sure where he was going with this. So then what if you take a family from any one species? Let's say a devil family, for example the Gremorys. They are known for their kindness and almost family-like treatment of their servants. So what if one of their future family members didn't do the same things as his family did, wouldn't he maybe feel the pressure to be like the others, even though he wouldn't want to? Issei asked, his example being a bit hard for Sanji to understand, but he had gotten the gist of it. So like how humans think all Asians are smarter than other races of humans? Sanji asked, trying to simplify it for himself, making Issei nod his head. Yes, like that I guess, didn't know that was a thing. Anyways, I feel that way when it comes to me and Vritra. My name is more or less just a copy of his, and my true form is a near-perfect copy of his. Even my evil dragon urges are much similar to his. So people when they learn of my relation to him, they always get this single-minded thought process of me as just another Vritra. Issei explained as he sighed heavily, remembering one of such moments. Sanji sat quietly and thought over what Issei had told him, he went pretty deep into, even for him. So deep he in fact felt someone else or something else also looking at it with him. On the outside Issei sat still, as a few more of those kinds of moments went through his mind, until he noticed Sanji was just staring into the air. His look was dead, and his breath seemed weird. Hey Sanji, are you okay? Issei asked as he moved over carefully to Sanji to check on him. Sanji suddenly summoned his sacred gear. Issei was a bit surprised until he felt a slight anger rise in him, thanks to a single thought. What did that bastard do to him? He gritted his teeth so much so he almost broke them. His hair began to float much like snakes around his head, making him look kinda like a male version of Magus. Vritra. Stop whatever it is you're doing. Issei yelled at Sanji's frozen body, which at those words seemed to move again. Sanji began to breathe quickly, almost like he hadn't been breathing for a minute or two. Sanji, are you okay? What did he do to you? Issei asked, as a slight bit of worry was shown with how he was trying to help Sanji. I am fine. I think I just activated my sacred gear while I was thinking about you had told me. I am okay now. Sanji said as he put a hand on Issei's left shoulder. It didn't make Issei less worried, but it wouldn't be encharcator for him if he pushed to check on him more than this. Okay, if you say so. Issei stood up a bit abruptly as he began to walk over and gather his things. Sanji looked on confused as he had just seen a friendly, then worriedly and now normal Issei all in one moment almost. So are you going to take me back to Issei turned around with an evil grin, making Sanji stiffen at the sight of it. No, you'll be staying in here. You have to get your own food and make your own sleeping area. As part of dragon training, this is mandatory. Issei said as he left before Sanji could get another word in and before he could see how worried Issei still was. Chapter 10. Understand Your Powers Part 2. Underworld, Dragon Territory, Underground Tunnels. It had been half a week, with Issei training Sanji mostly in running away and building some muscle, as well as making his body better at using his sacred gear. Sanji had managed to land a few hits on Issei in his daily running and gunning training that Issei had made him do. His progress was interesting, as it went better than Issei, Azazel and Sona had expected. Issei had to explain to them that he was in fact talking about Sanji when he told them about his progress. It had been so much of unexpected thing that Azazel had to change his plans for Sanji so that Issei had to finish the basic part of the training for Sanji in the first week. Because he would be sent to Gregory for some upgrades and come back to the tunnels where Issei was to finish his training. So now at the dawn of the fourth day, Issei stood silently before Sanji, who was in his running gear. A pair of shorts, a t-shirt and running shoes. Issei finally looked up, making eye contact with Sanji who twitched a bit at the sudden eye contact. Issei then smirked a bit, which made his fangs show. His body began to morph slightly as his parts of his human features disappeared and became more draconic. Sanji walked a bit backwards as he was not sure of what was happening, as normally Issei would give him a 10-second head start. He normally came in his true form and began a countdown. Issei. What's happening? Why aren't you in your woe? Sanji just barely dodged a slash attack from Issei, who now stood at 8 feet tall and in his draconic humanoid form. But Issei didn't answer, instead he slashed once again, then again and again. He slowly went into a pattern which Sanji was having trouble dodging as it became faster and faster for every time he dodged. Then Issei suddenly changed his approach as he sent an uppercut toward Sanji and also wide swing from his left. Sanji dodged away from the uppercut but got hit by the wide swing, sending him closer to Issei again, who kicked him away with a fast knee to his stomach. Sanji landed on his back, feeling the air in his lungs being shot out. He tried to support himself off the ground, but his sense told him to dodge, which he did as dent in the ground where he was earlier was made by Issei's left hand. Sanji got up quickly, jumping to the side as he felt his sense warning him of another attack at his lower legs, which happened as Issei's tail swung right where his feet had been a few moments ago. Issei. What are you doing? Chill out. Issei almost got him again with two side slashes, making Sanji have to duck under, then backstep before Issei's tail could stab him. Sanji then had to dodge back again as Issei tried to hit with a double hammer fist, which ended with breaking the ground under it, along with making the tunnel shake. What am I doing? I am attacking you, you idiot. Now fight back already. Issei roared as he sent another left fist flying towards Sanji, who dodged out of the way, only to be caught by Issei's right leg, sending him into the wall. Why? Is this part of okay, fine I'll fight. Issei had sent his right fist into wall Sanji had been in, making Sanji dodge out of the way, then finally taking a fighting stance. Issei smirked as he saw this and took his own. They both stood still for a bit. Sanji was sweating as he was vastly weaker compared to Issei, even when Issei was in his human form, he was still weaker than him. Issei stood still and just grinned, showing his sharp teeth, he had barely broken a sweat yet. A little drop of sweat rolled down the side of Sanji's face, hanging onto his chin before falling off. Time slowed down as Sanji raised his arms to defend himself while Issei began to shot off on his clawed feet. When the drop landed, Issei was slashing, kicking and slamming at Sanji's defense. Sanji could feel that his arms were begging to give in by the light amount of blood he could feel on his arms, as well as the feeling of his bones slowly breaking. Issei held back a lot and Sanji knew this, but even so this was still more than he could take. Come on Sanji. Try a little bit. Use your sacred gear or something. Issei yelled as he kept his attack going at full force, which had begun to make Sanji have to step backward slowly. Step Sanji could his left arm begging to give in as it felt heavier and heavier for every second. Step the side of his stomach began to hurt as well as Issei had begun to deal out attack all over Sanji's body. Step Sanji could feel himself up against a wall, literally as he could no longer step backwards. Issei stopped his onslaught, stepping a bit back letting his arms hang down to his sides. Sanji would move if he could, but his legs along with the rest of his body had taken more damage than he could handle. He felt onto his knees. He tried to support himself up against the wall, but it led to him falling onto his side. He couldn't feel his body, it was all numb. Issei stood there with a small grin as his eyes looked a bit disappointed at how Sanji had done with this. He turned around and waved his hand towards him. Sanji could see someone in what looked like nun attire coming over, he couldn't see their face, but he could hear it was a girl by the sound her voice. Issei and the girl talked a bit before Issei moved to the side, letting the girl see what stat Sanji was in. She rushed over and kneeled down before him, summoning 2 rings on her hands and began to envelop him in some green light. Issei, you really shouldn't go this far just because he seems promising. Yelled the girl, Woe's voice sounded familiar to Sanji as he could finally feel his body again. Yeah I know Asia, but lucky I brought you along just for the slight chance that he wasn't prepared for it. Sanji's eyes widened, well they would if he could manage that right now, but he could barely manage anything other than listening to them talking. I am happy that you at least thought this could happen, but Sona and Rias One-sama wouldn't be happy when they learn about this. Asia said in a tone Sanji had never expected from the kind-hearted devil. It seemed like a mother talking to her teenage son. I know, and I plan to take that storm head on when the times comes. Just heal the brat okay? Issei hissed back as he crossed his arms, making his rather impressive amount of muscle show. Asia stopped her healing as she had done all she could, which had made poor Sanji able to feel again. It also meant he could now feel the former pain in his body. All that pain in real-life combined made him feel weirdly tired and sore all over. Like he had just woken up from hard training day. Issei went over to Sanji, helping him sit probable so that he would be in less pain. There you go Sanji, sorry for not telling you beforehand, but I needed to see if you could take action or defend yourself if I or someone else suddenly attacked you. Issei said, earning himself a harsh glare from Asia and a tired nod from Sanji as he could barely think straight as his brain was still in a fight-or-flight state. Okay. Just warn me next time. Thank the masses Asia was here. Wait. Why is Asia here? Sanji asked as he found some composure as his body didn't feel as bad anymore. Asia and Issei gave each other a quick look before Issei sighed and walked a bit down the tunnel before turning back with what looked like 3 bento boxes. Eat first, then I'll let Miss Argento explain her sudden presence after that. Got it. Issei ordered, which Sanji agreed to right away as he knew it wouldn't be worth it to push for it now. And besides he would get to know why no matter what, so what could be harm? Time skip after lunch. I tell you, Rias makes the best lunch. I swear I'll have her be my mate and marry her soon enough, so stop laughing Sanji. Roared in slight intoxicated Issei, as his lunch had held a slight bit of magic in it to make him more open, something Rias hadn't put in. No, it was Azazel, but luckily for him, Issei didn't know yet and just thought Rias had done this for reasons. Sorry, I am not laughing, I just find it funny when you speak so openly about how much you love Rias-sama. It's admirable. Sanji said as he looked down on his lunch, cursing slightly how unmanly he was being unable to do the same as Issei. Asia was also laughing a bit at Issei's expense, but Issei wasn't as he noticed Sanji's slight gloom. He grinned knowingly, as he could almost feel it off him now that he looked closely. Should I say it? Nah, what's the point, am I not teaching him about romance, but fighting and his sacred gear? Issei thought, taking one last bite of a stewed dragon apple. Sanji looked up again, as he had remembered the promise order Issei had made earlier. So, are you going to tell me now? Why Asia is here? Sanji asked, gaining the attention of the two. Issei sighed, as he didn't really want to, but it had to be done. Keep this quiet, or else you will be joining your grandparents in the afterall a lot sooner than you might have planned, got it? Issei threatened, with a glare that could kill. It didn't help that he let his aura rise, as to make the surrounding area bow down to his pure power. Sanji nodded frantically, hoping to never feel this kind of pressure ever again. Good. Do you remember that day when I was attacked by Kiba and held Asia by my tail? Issei asked. Sanji sat for a small moment trying to remember until it came back to him, as he remembered being smacked at least once that day. He nodded with shame, as the place he was smacked also came back to him. Okay then, because that day I made a discovery about Miss Argento here. You see she and me share this weirdly family-like bond, much like you and me. I didn't really understand why, so when I went to Issei was interrupted as Sanji began to speak out of nowhere. Family bond? You and me? How is that possible, aren't you like from the underworld and a mix between a devil and dragon? Sanji asked, as was more surprised and a bit more interested in this family bond Issei felt towards him. Issei just sighed, before getting into a more comfortable post-ion, as he felt this was going to take long. Yes, I feel a family bond to you. But there is an obvious reason why. You're the host of Ritra, who is my old man, therefore I would feel this way towards any host of him, even more so if they also house his soul. Issei explained, making Sanji nod. Also, I am not a devil and dragon hybrid, I am a mix between a dragon and a half-dragon human. I became a devil because of Rias. And also, I was born on Earth in India in one of Ritra's most well-guarded prisons. Issei stops himself before revealing too much about himself. Luckily the idiot that is Sanji asked another dumb question, at least that's what Issei thinks. Oh so you're from India, cool. Then I guess you must love curry. Issei just sighed even louder, as this was like the 500th time someone has said that to him. He decided to just get back on track before Sanji could lead him down a long line of stupid questions. Anyways, so I felt this family bond with Asia for reason I didn't understand at the time and decided to investigate, albeit a bit roughly as I did knock her out so that I could take a look inside her soul, and such Issei got a hard chop to his head as Asia looked at him with an angry gaze, as she had clearly not been aware of this. What? You should know that I am not really interested in consent and such. Issei explained like it was a normal thing to say. Sanji just decided to sit silently, waiting for Issei to continue, which happened a bit after. Anyways, so when I looked inside Asia's soul I found a remnant of another soul inside her, or more like another part of her soul. I decided to mix these two souls, as I thought it would interesting to do so, since the two souls seemed to be a part of each other. Issei explained. He checked on Sanji to see if he was following, which he surprisingly seemed to be, somewhat at least. So when she woke up again, she had gained these new memories of her past life, along with a few changes to her personality as you can see. Issei finished. Sanji just nodded slowly as he had trouble understanding most of what Issei had said, but at the same he also felt he had missed the point Issei was going to explain regaining the whole family bond. So, I am just guessing here. But is Asia like related to you through this past life or version of her that you contacted to her new self? Sanji asked, making both Issei and Asia giggled a bit as this seemed to be the thing they had wanted him to ask them. Yep, she is my mom. Aw, what was that for? Issei asked, not noticing the shocked and confused face of Sanji, but was more focused on his mother's sudden slap on his cheek. You could have been more respectful when saying that. Treat your mother with respect. Asia explained while raising a finger in a commanding way, making Issei feel small in front of his mother. While this was happening Sanji was in a state of confusion and doubt. How can this be real was all he could think. It ended up being so much for him, he fainted. The two others when they noticed Sanji suddenly fainting, decided it was probable for the best. If he remembers this when he wakes up, then that's too bad, and if he don't then no harm done. So what do we do now, Issei? Asia asked while checking to see if Sanji was okay. Issei just watched Sanji's body for a few seconds before snapping his fingers summoning a purple flame. You get back to training, I train him so that he can handle more of my old man's power. Issei said as he snapped his fingers again, making the purple flame bigger while also taking out every other flame in the tunnels. A day later, come on now Sanji. Hit me harder, faster. Come on, give it your all. Issei shouted as Sanji was trying his best to hurt Issei. Sanji threw his left fist as hard as he could, which Issei dodged, then returned his hit with a slash from his claws. Sanji kicked him, making Issei have to take a step back and then take a fist to his shoulder. Issei sent a combination of slashes and kicked Sanji away, who dodged almost every attack, only taking light damage. They had been at this for an hour now, with Sanji slowly becoming better at attacking and dodging, but still nowhere as good as Issei, whom had to hinder himself a lot still. Sanji made Issei have to move to his right, making him have slight gap between his arms and the tunnel's walls, which was Sanji's plan. He sent a kick on Issei's left side, which Issei took and tried to hit back with his left arm, only to have stopped by Sanji's right arm. Then Sanji, even after taking a lot of damage, managed to throw Issei into the wall, making him couch out his spit from the hit. Sanji smiled in victory still as he felt great pride for having outplayed Issei, making him let his guard down, which made him not notice Issei's right arm sliding across the rough stony wall of the tunnel. Sanji felt an immense pain hitting him his left side of his stomach, sending him flying backwards. He managed to stay on his feet, but just barely. His left arm had a nasty scratch across, as it had slid against the wall. Issei stepped into the middle of the tunnel, his body becoming darker for Sanji to look at, as the lights behind him were being covered by his sheer size. Well done Sanji, I guess I'll have to kick it up a notch. Full scarelon. Issei spoke as his entire body became covered in scars, only the inner parts of his body were still just normal skin. He began to walk slowly towards Sanji, who got on his legs. He could feel his legs shaking as the sense of fear and tiredness was beginning to seep in. So are you ready for this Sanji? Or are you going to quit now? Issei mocked as he purposely stomped on the ground hard enough to break it under his feet. Sanji swallowed, then let out a tired sigh before getting his arms in a fighting stance. He glared at Issei, whom looked back with joy until he noticed something new on Sanji. His eyes. They had a slight hint of purple in them, along with slight change of his aura around him. It felt like a young dragon's. Issei just began to grin as it showed how much Sanji has grown in small amount of time. I won't give up, not yet at least. Not until I have learned all I can from you, lizard. Sanji spoke in his determined tone Issei had every heard. It made him look shocked as he hadn't expected Sanji to take this so seriously. And he hadn't expected him to mock him with that nickname. It made the battle-hungry part of him extremely happy that Sanji had more or less given consent to beat the shit out of him. It also angered his pride as a strong dragon that he would mock with that nickname, and now he had to pay for his defiance. Suit yourself, but don't tell me I didn't give you a chance. Issei said as he suddenly leaped at Sanji, who just barely blocked his attack with arms. He looked up to see Issei smiling like a madman, his eyes fully opened and watching him so closely. Then in a single second, Issei began to attack with a mix of slashes, strikes, kicks and even a bit attack. Sanji had to block, dodge and counter-attack more than he had ever had to before. But for every hit he took or landed, he could himself becoming stronger for every exchange of attacks. He didn't know why, but he felt happy fighting now, like it was something he had never known he would enjoy. It was thing he didn't understand how he could like fighting until Issei had told later on that day. As you grow stronger, so those your sacred gear. Even when you don't use it, it will become stronger, it will even sometimes make its host stronger without them using it. If you have noticed, I haven't made you use your sacred gear while we have been doing combat training, and it's because you'll need more training if I did, since your sacred gear is a dragon type, but even worse it's an evil dragon type. Issei explained. Sanji nodded as he tried to understand more about his new powers and likes and dislikes. It will affect you in different ways than your average sacred gear. Many of the strongest sacred gears will all change their host slowly or over time so that they can better use and control their powers. And this even more true for dragon type ones, as they will slowly change your whole body into that of a dragon's. You remember how I told you that I am 25% devil? Issei asked, which Sanji nodded to, not really understanding where he was going with this. Well, that's how much of a devil I used to be. I am more like 10% or 14% these days, the rest being evil dragon. Issei explained as he suddenly summoned his sacred gear, the boosted gear. And it's all because of Drake, as he keeps trying to change parts of my body into an dragon's one, but thanks to my heritage, it will all turn into evil dragon Na instead. Issei spoke with a bit less life in his tone as he looked darkly down one of the tunnels. Sanji sat quietly and watched him do so. Inside Sanji many emotions and thoughts were going through his head, but the most obvious one was his fear. Fear that Issei would become evil or turn towards evil. Or be forced into it by everyone around him. So you're trying to say you're becoming more evil every time you use your sacred gear? Asked Sanji, receiving a slow nod from Issei. Sanji looked down as he felt bad for him, wishing he could help him. Even if he was bastard sometimes, he was still a good person, right? I am not alone in this, as Vritra is turning you slowly into an evil dragon as well. We're both becoming evil. Issei spoke, making Sanji look up to see Issei still looking down the long dark tunnel. It made him stiffen up, as if he was frozen over with a spell. He felt so afraid of what this could mean for him, even more so what it could mean to those around him. But don't worry, you'll probably be dead by the time you become a real threat, and if not then I'll come and take you with me. Issei said, while still looking away. Sanji didn't know how to feel, but he knew his fear had become smaller, if not just a bit easier to deal with. Thank you, Issei. Chapter 11. Visit Underworld, Gremory territory. A heavy sigh was heard throughout the empty library of the Gremory Mansion as Rias was sitting with a mountain of homework. Most of it being basic training and how to be a good king, and other was advanced battle strategy. She had been hitting the books for a whole week straight now, only talking to her mother who would come by every other day, as well as her nephew Milikas. She was worried about peerage, mostly worried that they wouldn't learn anything or become stronger. She was also worried about Issei, as he had been acting weird the night before he was sent to train Sanji. It was so unlike him to be silent and not make a single comment, almost like he was dealing with something internal. Even when she tried to get an answer out of him, he gave very little information and had managed to switch the topic and then feed her ego by letting her be on top. Rias felt annoyed that he wouldn't tell her his problems, but it also slightly made her happy that he was still able to fight back. It made him more fun to be with. If one of the maids or her family had been in the room, they could see a slightly creepy smile on Ria's face, as well as a blush she just shouldn't have. Her thoughts were anything but pure, as she enjoyed these little things about Issei way too much, in a not very pure way. Hopefully, he will tell me when he is done with that idiot. Rias suddenly changed her face's expression back to that of her boredom as she heard the faint sound of someone coming, as light steps were heard throughout the halls of the library. She breathed out, then in, before turning back to her work trying to make it look like she was working. She kept listening for where the person was going, and judging by how loud and close their footsteps sounded, she could only guess they were here to talk with her. So then the second Cusetian, who was it? Thanks to the many magical books, few artifacts and such around in the library, her senses become quite dull and she has a harder time detecting people. I can hear that they're wearing shoes, so most likely a man. They sound a bit heavy, so it could be father or maybe Azazel. Guess I'll know when they show up fully. Rias thought as she began to focus a bit more on her work, still listening in on the man walking towards her. She could he had a fast step as he would take a step every other second instead of the other people she would normally hear who took around a second or two for each step. She could guess they wanted to see her, which led her to think it could maybe be her brother. Then the walking stopped, the last step had been taken just on the other side of a bookcase, containing, funnily enough, a detailed history of the Gremories. Rias turned towards the it, waiting for him to turn the corner and show himself. She was getting quite interested in knowing who this person could be. Her three main guests were still her father, Azazel and her older brother. All for the fact they would be the only people to interrupt her outside of her nephew and mother. She heard a knock from the other side of the bookcase, making her smile a bit as this person was treating this bookcase like a door to a room. A door to Ria's room. You may enter. Rias spoke, giggling a bit at the slightly childish approach of this person. But she was not ready for who came out from around the corner, and the first to sit her off was the lightly gold-like skin reminding her of a yellow moon. Then the long logs of black and golden hair, and underneath came the face of a rather handsome man. His eyes were closed, but he wore a rather large grin as he stepped into the doorway. Rias felt fear at the sight of him, as she could feel power radiating off of him, a lot of it. Even more than Issei or Sirzechs' convent. She sat frozen in her chair as the man stood with his shoulders up against the bookcase, in the only way out of this small room of bookcases. Hello Lady Rias, it has been some now hasn't it? The man asked, much to the confusion of Rias who was confused as to how this man knew her and how she didn't remember like him at all. The man gained a lightly confused face at the sight of Rias' fearful one. Oh Rias, don't worry, I am not here to hurt you. I just wanted to talk to you about my nephew, Issei, that's all. The man stated while raising his hands in peaceful gesture. It helped Rias calm herself, but only slightly as this man kept making her feel more scared for every word he spoke. Even more so that last bit. Is he Issei's uncle? Then how have I no memory of him? It took a lot of willpower for her just to nod and sit in a way to make him feel he was being listened to. She did mostly as she felt he could kill her and everyone here in a heartbeat if he wanted to. Good. Well, since it seems you don't remember me, I guess should reintroduce myself. The man said before he snapped his fingers, making the entire room shake at the sudden release of his power. But this was not the most shocking thing he did, because what he had summoned into his hand was even more terrifying. Black lighting was dancing around his fingertips and jumping onto a few pieces of metal nearby and destroying it completely. Rias knew that only one being could use this kind of magic, which only made her dread the chance that this was said person, and not just some man who had learned to do so too. My name is Crom Cruach, the Crescent Moon Dragon and uncle to Issei Imprisoned. Pleasure to meet you again after so many years, Rias Gremory. Crom reached out his other hand as the other still held a few glimpses of lighting. Rias reached slowly to shake his hand as she feared even more now for not only her life but the entirety of the devil territory. But even more pressing, why would Crom come all this way just to talk with her when he could just go and talk with Issei first? She felt his raw strength when he grabbed her hand in his own, almost crushing it as he shook it. She took her hand back in a swift movement as her instincts were yelling at her to run away or else she would die. But she couldn't and she knew that and so did Crom as he made it so. As he had more or less taken both her and her entire home hostage, which made Rias try her best to recollect herself and try to make the most out of this shit of situation. Or at least try to make everyone being kept hostage be able to see another day. What do I? Oh, the pleasures of such a sudden visit from the ultimate evil dragon? Rias nervously asked. Her left hand was clenched so tightly to try to keep her from fainting or seeming weak. It seemed to work as Crom opened his eyes, showing her his two differently colored eyes. One black as the abyss, the other as golden as the wings on Arch Mitchell. His smile spread it out into a bigger one, making Rias shiver at the unnatural face expressions he could muster. Oh, do I need a reason to meet my nephew's mate? You're my niece, you know. So I should visit you at least once, right? Crom said, making Rias feel less tense but also slightly worried what this could mean for her. But also bugged her a little that Crom saw Rias as Issei's mate when Issei was nothing above a lover or plaything to Rias, but this was probably not the right time to say that. And more so with this man in front of her. Really? He. Then thank you Uncle MHN. Rias' mouth was covered by Crom's hand as he slightly skewed her face. Don't you dare call me that, do you really think I will let you call me that? Just because I am calling you my niece, don't mean you can call me your uncle. If you were a dragon, then maybe, but you're not now are you filthy devil whore. Crom spoke as his sparks of dark lighting flew around him. His razor-sharp teeth were on full display, along with his slit eyes. He didn't need to turn into a form familiar to Issei's half-human, half-dragonic form to show off his dragonic body. He was a full dragon after all, and one of the strongest ones at that. Now listen here niece, I will only say this once. I see you as a weakness to my nephew and his future, but because he loves you as much he does, I will let you live. But once he finds someone better or just leaves you, I will personally kill you for toying with his heart, is that understood? Rias shook her head frantically, as this threat was not one to underestimate, not by any means as it came from the strongest, non-god, dragon alive. Crom let go of her face and let the lighting die out. Good, now tell me where I can find my nephew. Was all he asked, to which Rias chose to tell him, which seemed to annoy him as he sighed heavily. He then stomped on the ground, making a stake of black lighting hit him. Once it was gone, so was he, leaving only a burnt floor along with a terrified Rias, who just sat in her chair, unable to breathe with all that had just happened. She decided to not do anything for the rest of that day and just sat with her fear slowly disappearing. But like heck she could do that, since it hit her right after that she had put Sanji and the dragon near Issei lactation in danger. Oh for the love of the mass, what have I done? Underworld, dragon territory, tunnels. Alright, see you tomorrow Sanji and don't slack off just because you're getting an upgrade. Issei spoke as Sanji nodded while holding a backpack and standing on a circle with a dragon crest on it. The circle soon vanished in a bright purple light, along with Sanji leaving Issei alone in the tunnels. So what does the son of an evil dragon king do when he don't have to train a whimper listen to dumb devils all day? He turns into his true form and sleep at the bottom of a deep hole with his few treasures surrounding him. Which happened to be pictures of Rias and him as kids, with a few leftover piece of some white armor. Thanks to his many years in imprisonment, Issei hadn't really have a chance to make himself a hoard of gold and gems like many others his age or at his power level, leaving him with personal items and leftover battle trophies. The life of Issei Imprisoned was hard and he knew that as he felt slight shame that his most precious treasure would be seen as little less than a shameful retelling of the princess and evil dragon story every human child has been told. But even so, this was still 100 times better than trying to sleep with chains all over one's body, and so he could find enough comfort to fall asleep here. He could even snore, which made the surrounding tunnel shake slightly every time he did. This is the life. No chains, no dumb pure-blood devils ordering me around, no crows and no Sanji. If only every day could be like this. Issei thought as he continued his half-awake sleep through most of his afternoon until he felt someone enter his territory. He could feel them clearly as they walked down his tunnels with little to no shame or try to be stealthy, as he could feel the light vibrations of their footsteps. Well, there goes that afternoon. Now let's see what these guys might be after. Issei thought as he morphed himself into a smaller version of himself before slithering out into the tunnels. But the group of intruders, which was a group of 5 low-ranking devil kids, 2 of them being close to teenage age. 2 of the younger kids had dark hair, one was a girl and the other a boy. The 2 older ones had dark red hair and the other dark blue hair, both were boys. The last one had golden hair and was a girl. Come on now, just a bit longer. I heard a dragon was sleeping down here. The dark blue-haired boy said as he marched onwards, with the younger kids following him. The second oldest was behind them all as he wasn't so keen on this whole thing. Are you sure this is okay? I heard from my grandmother that this place is dragon territory. We shouldn't be here. The dark red-haired boy said, but the others chose to ignore him and continued walking down the dark tunnels. The blue-haired kid summoned a flame in his hands as a light source. The younger kids looked on and aware as he was able to do this, something they all still hadn't learned how to do. I know, it's pretty hard to do, but if you just train hard enough you can maybe be as strong as I am one day. Ain't that right, Milikas? The blue-haired kid asked Milikas, who was looking around frantically. Yeah sure, can we leave now? I don't want to get in trouble with my grandmother again. Milikas said as he stopped the whole group with his worries. The younger kids just looked towards the other older kid, the blue-haired one. He smirked and made himself look bigger just slightly before speaking again. Oh? You scared of your grandmother? She ain't anything special, now this come on. Who cares what she thinks? The blue-haired kid said as he began to walk down the tunnels again. Milikas decided to follow after them even if he didn't want to and knew his grandmother would scold him to not even think about what his parents would do. But he also did to protect the other kids as he was the only one with strong magic in the group even if he could only fire 4 or 5 balls of destruction. They would still be enough to hopefully let the others escape. The kids turned another corner but when they did, they all froze. Milikas didn't as he didn't feel frightened by this feeling that was hanging in the air. He could feel it was in Dragon's irritation but it felt familiar to him for some weird reason. Are you guys okay? He asked, hoping slightly the other kids would turn tail and head home, but unfortunately the blue-haired one was either brave or really dumb. Ah, so I see the dragon sees me as a worthy enemy. Come on, we must be close. He yelled as he began to sprint down the tunnel, summoning another flame in his other hand. The other kid stayed behind with Milikas. What should we do, Milikas? I am scared, Milikas. Can we go home now, Milikas? I don't want to follow after Alex anymore. Said the younger kids. Milikas tried to calm them down before telling them to head out again and that he would go get Alex. Don't worry, I'll be fine. I am Rias Gremory and I won't let that idiot be harmed. Milikas said as the younger kids looked at him with admiration before he made them all run out of the cave again. Then he himself went deeper into the tunnels, walking slowly and carefully as to further irritate the dragon who lived here. He tried to listen for Alex's footsteps but he couldn't hear them at all. He could someone watching his every step, almost like the tunnels were alive and were watching him. He wanted to go home to his family, but he couldn't let his friend die or get harmed. Even if he was an idiot, he was still his best friend. Alex. Alex, are you there? Milikas called out in a whisper-like yell, but he received no answer other than the silence which was being to get to him. He turned around frantically at the smallest sound, which seemed to happen more and more for every step deeper into the tunnels he went. He stopped dead in his tracks when he felt a wet yet hot sensation touch his feet. He looked down hoping he wouldn't see piss. Oh, thank the mass. But still you. Milikas said as he felt a little bit more calm as it seemed like this was Alex's piss, which meant he had probably been scared off by the dragon. So then came the next question, where was he? If he really had been scared off by the dragon, then shouldn't he had run into him by now? That idiot. Gus, I'll have to look in one of the other tunnels. Milikas said as he began his siege again. He began walking back to where he came from, with no idea that the dragon was standing right next to the pool of piss, with fainted Alex in his hands. Oh, so you're Milika's friend. Oh, too bad, that don't mean shit to me. Now what to do? Issei thought as began to head back to his lair with Alex in his arms. Issei didn't really notice the smell of piss, as the most noticeable smell was the kid's fear that was just reeking off him. It's a rather sweet smell for most evil races, even more so for ones with a great sense of smell, like dragons. He dropped him on top of a small pile of leather that Sanji had made into his bed this week. Now then, I guess it's time for you wake up or else I might make you into tonight dinner. Issei said as he flicked Alex's head hard enough to leave a bruise but also hard enough to make him wake up again. He looked around weakly before noticing Issei, who was in his half-human and dragon form, which obviously made him back away. No. Don't kill me. He cried out, waving his hand out in front of him, like it would protect him or something. Issei just sighed before he calmly inhaled and then suddenly made a hole in the wall next to the kid's head. "Shut it, devil." He spoke in a cold voice, making Alex freeze from fear of his show of his strength and speed. "Good, now tell me what you and your devil friends were doing in a dragon's territory." Issei asked in a bit more friendly tone, but Alex was still too afraid to answer, making him lose his patience, something he had thought he had a lot of as he sat in chains and waited most of his life. "Speak now or you'll never see your family again." Is yelled out, showing off his dangerously sharp teeth, making the area gain a strong acidic smell. It came from Alex's already pissed pants, which just made Issei sigh even more. Issei sat back in more relaxing way before snapping his fingers, making a few lights light up the room. Alex, being a child, forgot about his dire situation for a brief second as the many dancing lights were cool to look at. He would have smiled if not for the sight of Issei sitting in a bit of shade, making him look scary. "Don't worry kid, I just want to know why you would come in here, then you can go." "Okay, I promise." Issei said, flashing a friendly smile at Alex, who while still being scared, gathered a small bit of courage to speak. "Me and my friends came here to see a sleeping dragon. I ran ahead to fight it. But you scared me and so I. Alex mumbled on about being scared and stuff. Issei sat and listened to the small bits he could get before sighing at the reasoning and such. "You really came here just to see a dragon sleeping? Are you that dumb? I mean really, are you that dead set on dying an early death? Didn't your parents tell you to never approach a sleeping dragon?" Issei said in an angry voice as he begun to scold Alex for his stupid behavior, which Alex rather maturely acted. "I know. I didn't mean for the others to be harmed or anything. I just wanted to look cool in front of them. You know." Alex said as he tried to hide behind his legs. Issei just sighed again as he now remembered why he hated kids. "They're all stupid, even more than pitiful old fools," he thought before standing up and reaching a hand out to Alex. "I understand kid, now let's get you out of here." Issei spoke as he reached a hand out to Alex, who took it hesitantly before standing up himself and following after Issei. Alex looked up to see Issei's face as he thought that even though he was scary to be with, he looked really cool. But he didn't see the cool face, instead he just saw Issei looking at him with scary grin. "But before we get you of here, I'll need you to do something for me Alex." Time skip. Milikas and the other kids stood outside, waiting for Alex to come. Grafia had come as well, as she had to bring the kids back home and scold Milikas for going into dragon territory. They had waited for half an hour, with no sign of Alex coming out. Grafia wanted to go inside and find the kid, but she needed to bring the other ones back first, but she couldn't just leave if did happen to come out while she was not there. "Mother. Do you think Alex is okay?" Milikas asked. He even held onto her hand with a tight grip, making his worries obvious to Grafia. She bent a bit down so that she could pat his head in reassuring way. "I am sure he will be fine, he's probably just lost in there. But let's hope one of the dragons who live here Alex." Grafia and the others notice in the light parts of the tunnels a young boy walking out with wounds all over his body. Grafia began to rush over to check on him until she saw that he was holding someone's hand in his left hand. She chose to stand between the kids and this unknown man as she couldn't see who he was thanks to him walking in darker parts of the tunnels. "Who are you? What happened to that boy?" Grafia asked as she released a bit of her magic just to get the point across. The man just chuckled lightly, still walking with Alex's hand in his own. When he spoke he shocked Grafia and made Milikas happy. "Geez Grafia, I saved one of Milika's friends and the first thing you do is threaten me?" Issei spoke as he came out with Alex next to him. Grafia was happily surprised by him being here but changed her focus when she noticed how injured Alex was. He was shaking as walking all the way out had been more than he could right now. She rushed over and took him in her arms, looking over part of him worriedly. "Alex. Alex, are you okay?" she asked frantically, receiving a weak nod from Alex, who began to cry and hug her tightly as his tear began to flow down in streams. "Grafia, I was so scared. A dragon attacked me. He hurt me. But Issei saved me. He came and beat the dragon." Alex spoke weakly while Grafia was trying to comfort him. Issei just stood back, looking mildly bored as he didn't really care about this whole thing. Grafia looked over towards him, making him switch the expression from bored to a more relaxed look. "Thank you Issei, thank you for helping him. I hope he didn't cause too much trouble for you." Grafia said, while bowing with head, which Issei did back. "It was nothing. I just happened to be stationed here for the whole training thing with Sanji. But I hope you kids have learned something. Don't go near the dragon territory, or other kind." Issei looked briefly at Alex, who cowered away from his gaze. "Won't always be nearby when you go into our territory, so let this be a lesson to you all," Issei said, with a serious tone. All of the kids nodded before Grafia took them all back to the Gremory territory. Chapter 12. End of training. Underworld, Gremory territory. I hope we can become great friends, Akeno-chan. Akeno sprung up from her bed, sweat flying off her as she did. She tried to calm herself with deep breaths, even putting a hand over her heart as the beating pain had begun to set in. It seemed to work slightly as her breathing became more controlled and her heart calmed down little by little. She took a few more calming breaths before she looked at the room she was in, scanning for anything or anyone. The room was dark, the only light being that of the artificial moon's light shining in, leaving small spots of light on the floor. She looked carefully at her room, noticing nothing that shouldn't be here. She stood up a short bit after, just to make herself feel totally safe. She went over to the little kitchen room, looked inside while staying in the open doorway. Nothing, only the light sound of the refrigerator could be heard. She then headed over to the bathroom, but before she opened the door, she noticed that the lights were on inside of the bathroom. She wouldn't have noticed if not for her feet stepping on something wet, as when she had looked down she could see a small wave of light under the door. She put up her guard as she prepared a silent eye spell. She reached for the doorknob and after taking a few quick breaths opened up the door and pointed her hand with the spell on towards the room. No one. There was no one inside. The light had been on because she had forgotten to turn it off. She shut the door and went over to her bed again, picking up her watch on her nightstand to check the time. It was a little over midnight, just like the times before. She sighed heavily before lying down on her bed again as she was going to try to get at least a bit more sleep. This had become a part of her routine as the days of the training camp had passed, always the same nightmare, and it would always get longer for each night and she would always wake up at midnight. Needless to say, she doesn't get much sleep these days, at least not in the underworld. Dragon territory, underground tunnels. Below the cold and hard rocky terrain that was most of the dragon territory, in the tunnels of old devil mining operations, a blue circle had appeared. It had the Citri family crest on it, but with few differences making it the teleportation circle of servant or peerage member. And it was a peerage member, namely Sanji, pawn of Sona Citri, who appeared out of the blue light with a bag over his left shoulder. He looked around the tunnel, a small smile on his face as he had missed this place, even if he had almost been killed while training with Issei. But now he was back and had gotten a few upgrades from Azazel. He hadn't gotten used to them yet, but he could definitely feel that he was stronger, even if it was only a little bit more than before. Though he knew that he would become even stronger, as Azazel had told him the next part of his training with Issei was going to be him mastering his new gained strength. Speaking of Issei, where was he? Sanji had kinda hoped he would be standing here and waiting for him, or at least had been nearby or left a note or. Is that a statue? Of Rias? Sanji was stunned as he locked his eyes on a rather nice statue of Rias, and even more when he noticed that she wasn't made of sandstone, she was just naked. The curves of her body, her firm yet still soft-looking breast and her nope, I know this is a trap. So just come out already Issei. Sanji yelled, blushing slightly for letting his guard down. But he still received no sign that Issei was there. He felt like he was alone, well at least physically alone. He let down his bag and began to walk down the tunnels, trying to search for Issei with his more sensitive sense. But much like the name suggests, they are more sensitive and Sanji hasn't had time to get used to them yet. He suddenly felt a major urge to gag, maybe even throw up. He didn't know why, but it just came over him as he passed down a corner of the tunnels. Then he found why, just as he turned the corner. His foot had hit a thick type of liquid, he didn't know 100% what it was, but he could tell just by the smell that it had a lot of iron in it. He reached a hand down, touching the liquid slightly, before taking his dirtied hand up and looking at it. He wanted to gag, he wished he hadn't looked more into it. It was blood, and a lot of it as far as he could smell. And it only seemed to get worse further down the tunnel. He stood still, almost frozen in place. Question why there was blood here and whose blood it was. And did Issei have something to do with it? Had Issei been attacked or had he attacked someone? He felt a slight push of some sort, not by someone but by his mind, by his instincts. He felt a need to go further and find the source of all this blood. With slow and weak steps, Sanji began to walk down the tunnel, walking on the left side of the blood. He could feel that he was reaching the source that this thing inside him wanted him to reach. He didn't feel he was in control, but more like an observer. He passed down another corner and as he did he was hit with this new and much stronger smell. Rot. Decay. Meat. Sanji began to try and take some form of control again, he tried to walk away and forget this, maybe even hope that Issei would tell him what had happened. That it was some monster that he killed or it was someone he had tried to save from a monster. Just something else than whatever this thing inside of him wanted to see. He felt his slowly being pulled towards the tunnel and down towards the source of the blood and this slowly intoxicating smell of meat. His body didn't listen to him, like he was just a soul stuck inside of it. He began to walk in the blood, it slapsing to the sides and drenching his shoes and pants. What in the name of the original Satans is this? He reached a cave where he saw a hill of bodies. His body had stopped, Sanji could feel he was slowly gaining back control, but how was that going to help now? His legs suddenly gave out and he sat on his knees, the blood being deep here began to drench all of his pants, and now his shirt too. He didn't care about that, he just wanted to know what he was looking at here. He counted the bodies, something he wished he hadn't as it seemed to be well over 10 people, maybe even 20. He was stunned at this, but he was even sickened by this. Even more so when his eyes adjusted to the dark and he began to see faces of younger people, some who were old and even one who looked like a child. But that was only the tip of the iceberg as he also saw their maimed bodies, their missing limbs, and some even lost their heads. He was completely stunned at the sight, so much so that he didn't hear footsteps approaching him from behind. They stopped, only a short distance from him. "You found your legacy, kid. It's less fucked up than I had expected." The person behind him spoke, it sounded old and had a powerful tone to it, like it could make any person bow to them. Like a king. Sanji was still locked in place, but he heard what the man had told him. "Well, what do you mean my legacy?" Sanji asked, horrified at the idea of this being his doing, in some way or form. The older man just hummed a bit before walking closer to him, stopping on the side of Sanji. Sanji became scared of the newfound closeness, but also curious of the person next to him. He could only see he wore shoes, had dark skin and wore a black cape with purple or yellow lines on it. "I mean that you, Sanji Genshiro, will one day leave behind this as part of your story. This will be the thing people will remember you for, another power-hungry dragon-type sacred gear host." The old man spoke before he began to hum again in a weird almost Phrygian tone, with a few words that Sanji didn't know. Sanji began to think about what he said, that this was the thing people would remember him for. "Why?" he asked softly, but loud enough for the old man to stop humming and give an answer. "Because that is the fate of those who are chosen as hosts for a sealed dragon's soul. But be glad, this is the smallest pill in history, at least for my hosts," the old man said before continuing to hum his song. Sanji would have asked another question, but the last bit he said hit him hard. This old man was not just some ghost or whatever, he was Vritra. Sanji looked up to his side, his face morphing into a shocked expression as he made eye contact with Vritra. This was Vritra, the evil dragon king and one of the only dragons who had been sealed into sacred gears. Sanji, while admiring or being horrified, he didn't really know anymore, started to notice something about him. He looked an awful lot like Issei, he was only taller and more mature in his facial features. This starring of his didn't go unnoticed as Vritra smirks with pride, something that Sanji also thought looked like Issei. "Oh, you are an interesting host indeed. And you obviously know when you see a handsome man, but don't be a kiss ass, I hate people like that," Vritra said, making Sanji quickly look away. He didn't really know what else to look at, as he could only look at the future of his legacy. Where was it? The pill of bodies, the blood, it was all gone. Sanji looked to his side, expecting Vritra to also be gone, but he was still there. "Vritra, what is happening? Where was the hill, Sanji, where are you just talking with Vritra?" Issei asked, the now even more confused Sanji as he looked back at him, now seeing the younger version of Vritra standing in his place. What is going on?" Sanji asked himself out loud, which made Issei look confused. "Well, I think you just got your first meeting with your partner. Congrats, it seems to not have been as bad as I heard it would be, as he always does something like showing them their future. But don't worry, it's only a possible outcome," Issei said, trying to comfort Sanji, who felt a bit better after hearing that, but he still couldn't really shake away that image from his head. It was going to haunt him for a long time, and he had a feeling that wasn't going to be the only time he would see stuff like this. But at least he knew that it wasn't a preset way for him, that it wasn't his fate. It was only a possible future, and if he didn't want it, then he would have to become stronger so he can choose his own legacy. Thank office, he didn't notice that I made feel less dread, or else he would question his own morals. Well, I hope he is ready for the next 3 weeks. Issei thought. Big time skip, underworld dragon territory. The dawn of the last day of Azazel's training camp had come, and with it came a bunch of relief and happy cries from the many victims of Azazel's training methods. Even more so from Sanji, as he could finally go outside the tunnels again after being stuck there for over half a month with Issei. He wouldn't say it was all bad, as he did get stronger, faster and much better at using his sacred gear. He even got upgraded so that he now had all the pieces of Vritra's sacred gear, thanks to Azazel. It had been tough at times, sometimes even life-threatening, but he had survived every step and gotten stronger from it. So when he woke up that morning, he wasn't filled with a slight fear of what Issei would make him do, but instead with excitement over what Sona would say about his progress. He even hoped Issei would say something nice about him, like he did a few weeks back. He didn't know why, but he got very happy whenever Issei would speak well of his training. He thought it was probably something like, that bit of him that is a dragon is happy that he, a stronger dragon, is speaking well of him. He didn't think too much about it, but he wanted to hear him say something like that about him again. Aren't you in love with that Citri girl? asked Vritra through the mental connection that he and Sanji had recently opened between each other. Sanji blushed at this, as he didn't know that the host of the dragon or spirit can't hide their emotions and such from said spirit or dragon. Yeah. I mean just a little, what's it to you? He asked, still blushing a bit at his obvious crush for Sona. It's just that I thought by how you see my hatchling that you were in love with him. Guess I was wrong. Vritra said, if Sanji could see him then he would see a giant snake shrugging. Sanji just began to blush even more than before. How could Vritra just something like it was nothing, and what did he mean? It seemed like Sanji was maybe in love with Issei. These were thoughts that were going through Sanji's head, something Vritra looked in on and found amusing to see his host panic over. Why do you think that? Just because he looks good doesn't mean I like him. I just respect him for being strong. Yeah, that's it. Sanji answered back, hoping that shut Vritra up. It didn't. Oh really? Then why was one of the first things you were thinking when you woke up him? I know my hatchling looks good, but I don't think that's what has taken your interest in him. Vritra spoke, making Sanji quiet as Vritra's words carried a bit of insight he couldn't deny. Sanji wouldn't disagree that he had an interest in Issei, but with Vritra's little insight or at least his words, it made him think about what kind of interest he had. Was it just friendship? Was it maybe a desire to be as strong as him? A desire to help him with his own demons? Or did he maybe like him, a bit more than just a friend? Maybe you got a point there. I haven't really thought about it, not now, young one, he is coming. Act normal. We'll discuss this later. Vritra interrupted, as Sanji could now hear Issei's footsteps creeping closer. Before he stood at the front of the tunnel Sanji had turned into his sleeping spot. Good morning Sanji, are you ready to get back to a normal bed? Because I sure am, sleeping on rocks for a month has made my back sore. Issei spoke as he came fully around the corner, carrying a big bag full of metal stuff, judging by the sound coming from it. Sanji sat there for a minute before he woke up fully and stood up. Yes. Yes, I am ready to sleep in a normal bed again. And Issei. Sanji said with a bit of blush. Issei just looked at him confused, though with his slitted eyes, it just made him look angry. Yes Sanji, what is it? He asked coarsely, his tone being friendly enough, but his eyes still looked like he wanted to kill. Sanji glooped, before bowing deeply. I just wanted to thank you for training me and for teaching me about what I can really do. Thank you Issei. Sanji said in the most respectful tone he could muster. Issei was taken a bit aback. After a bit of no one saying anything, Sanji looked up to see Issei hiding his face behind his left hand. Issei. You okay? Sanji asked, concerned that he might have done something to upset him. At least he was until he saw Issei's face, which held a cocky smirk. He gulped just from fear of what this meant. Oh, so you're thankful. Don't be, I did this for myself, you were just a byproduct. Issei said, though his voice wasn't cold or unfriendly, it was just as before. Sanji had been with Issei for a long time now and had learned that Issei just acts this way and doesn't let people see him as being weak. He knew that this was pretty much the closest he would get to a "you did great, so be proud of yourself" he was going to get from Issei. You may say that, but I know you helped me more than you needed to some of the time, so don't act like you didn't care. Sanji said back, with a less than cocky smirk, but of a friendly one. Issei just waved his left hand as he turned around and began walking down the tunnel. Whatever you say, anyways, are you coming or what? We have to be back at 12 or else we'll be late for Azazel's gift. Issei said, but with a hidden smirk. Sanji looked at his wristwatch, seeing the clock was already 11:23. He picked up his bags and ran up to the side of Issei. Do you know what he will give us? Sanji asked. Oh, it's something good, trust me on that. Issei answered back, still hiding his smirk. Small time skip, underworld, Gremory territory. Good job everyone. Your hard work and sore bodies have now all been rewarded as you have become stronger, some more so than I had imagined. Azazel said as he had knowing smirk, the same one Issei had, though none of the others really noticed or chose not to comment. So as a reward, besides the party held for the Demonslayer youth tomorrow, I will now give you the greatest gift I can grant you all. Azazel said as he slowly raised his left hand. They all looked at it, curious as to what would happen when and what he would give them. Hopefully it's Phoenix Tears or maybe a book on sacred gears. Rias said to Sona, who nodded agreeing with her idea. Yes, either of those two would be nice and most definitely useful. Sona answered back. Azazel's hand stopped, then opened up as it was the robotic arm he had gotten after his fight with Kokabrial Leviathan. In the airspace between the many split parts of that was his arm, a mirror of sorts had taken place. All of them looked curiously at it and wondered what it meant. Then they began to notice it held the image of someone in it. A giant black snake with golden and purple lines going down its body and with two massive purple eyes staring right at them. They all realized what this meant, even more so did Sanji as he had seen those eyes a lot more than he would like to admit. It was Issei in his true form. Rias and Sona knew based on the golden lines, this was his truest form where he, after hellish training and a lot of negotiating with Drag, had been able to add his boost ability to this form, thus making it the strongest form he can take. This form alone can make him, with at least 60 or so more years he could become the third heavenly dragon, as he is already the third or second dragon king alone with this form. This is your reward kids, hope you'll enjoy your fight with a dragon king level dragon at full power. Azazel said as he closed his arm and walked off the little pedestal he had been standing on before. All of them turned back towards the now transformed Issei. He was watching them all with his slitted eyes. They could hear his slow and relaxed breathing, they could even sometimes see small clouds of steam come out from his snout. He was huge. At least 3 times bigger than when they fought after the train fake out a month ago. They could see his power radiating off him, as his aura had almost become visible to the naked eye. He was much stronger than them, and they knew it, but he didn't know how strong they had gotten either. Rias and Sona stepped forward, pride in each of their steps as they too began to let out their power, a sign specific to dragons that says they are willing to fight them. I Rias Gremory, heiress of the Gremory clan Changelinu, Dragon King Issei Hijishiki to a fight with mine and Sona Citri's peerage against you. Rias declared, her voice sounding off with pride as she felt she and the others could take him on and maybe win. The others behind the 2 kings summoned their weapons, sacred gears and battle cloths, showing that they were ready to fight. We got you Rias Sona-sama, they all shouted behind them as they all stood in position and were ready to fight. Issei began to move his head up higher towards the sky, slowly lifting the rest of his body as he went, showing off his full 125 meters length. Then the end of his tail too was no longer on the ground and he was now flying, much like a Chinese dragon. I accept your challenge devils, as my pride as a dragon and the son of a dragon king is on the line. Now get ready, for I will not go easy on you anymore Rias. Issei roared as in a swift motion, he began to launch himself towards the group, thus beginning the battle and the final tests Azazel had planned. Azazel only saw parts of it start before he flew a few hundred meters away to make distance as he knew Issei was going to create some havoc. Chapter 13. Last test. Underworld, Gremory territory. Fire. Yelled Sona as many different ice, fire and wind magics were thrown at the now gigantic-sized snake that was Issei's true form. They had been fighting for little less than 2 minutes and Issei had still yet to attack since he flew towards them and destroyed an old pre-Devil Civil War tower. The attacks all hit him, but it didn't do jack shit as Issei scales this was much tougher this time. The many attacks had though maybe not damaged him, but it made a cloud of smoke around him, letting the 2 devil peerages to prepare an attack with all of their knights and rooks. A plan made by using Ria's brute force tactics and Sona's more detailed planning abilities. In a swift motion Kiba, Zenovia, Kaneko, Meguri, Yura and Sanji all launched towards Issei at the fastest speeds they could. Kiba and Zenovia held their swords towards each other as they prepared for a combined slash attack, with Kaneko cocking back her fist to hit the hopefully wounded area. The 2 both slashed with all the strength they had, but it left a dent in his scales, and Kaneko could only make said dent a millimeter deeper, making it at most 2 millimeters deep. Sanji, Yura and Meguri tried something similar, but with Sanji as the big hitter instead of Yura. A heavy overhead slash from Meguri with her samurai sword, which left a deeper dent than the other group had made. Yura then used as much of her strength as she could in left arm and made the dent become an almost tiny hole. Sanji felt this was it and powered up as much power as he could before sending his fist flying towards the target. He felt it contact and it felt strong. Really strong. He could the scale giving in and making him feel a bit of the soft skin underneath it. When the 2 different attacks had been done, the cloud of smoke was still up. The 2 groups landed next to their own kings, but the mood on their faces was all different. The orc group was a little saddened that they couldn't even inflict a real wound on Issei, while the Citri group was cheering that they hit through his armor. Even more so was Sanji as he yelled out. I finally got him. I fucking wounded Issei Hijishiki. He yelled out, his pride obvious and justified, as this was a big thing for these 2 peerages. Unfortunately for the pre-teens, their joy and pride over this small success was short-lived. Out of the smoke cloud came Issei's full head, with his mouth open wide and ready to swallow them up. They all managed to dodge out of the way, but not without some eye-to-eye contact with his giant slitted eyes. He bit down on a small hill of stones, then turned around towards the orc and slithering towards them, spitting medium-sized rocks at them as he went. Luckily Akeno, Rias and Asia could easily fly out of the way, but Gasper, Kiba, Zenovia and Kaneko weren't so lucky and had to run or else they would be hit by the flying rocks. Sona and her peerage tried to help by firing magic at Issei, but it did no more than make more clouds of smoke and dust. It also made them not see the end of his giant tail swipe towards them, sending them all flying into the ruins of the old tower. Damn it, why is he so tough? I thought for sure we would have been able to hinder him a bit with that attack. Akeno said as and the others looked over the chaos that was this test battlefield, with Issei covering at least a fourth of it. I don't know, but it seems his scales are much tougher than when Sona fought him last time. Rias said, before aiming her arms at Issei, and began to charge a ball of destruction towards him. Will that even work? If none of our other magic, it has too and it always does. His leash made use of this power, so it must be able to hurt him. Rias said back, stopping Akeno. Rias fired off her power of destruction towards Issei's head. Lucky for her, he was focused on her other peerage members, unlucky for her they had been hurt by his attacks. Her ball of destruction hit him cleanly on the head, leading to what sounded like a roar coming from him. Yes, bullseye. I told you it would work. Rias said, feeling a little bit more at ease, now that she knew she could still do some damage to him. She and her two Rias spoke, Asia nodded and started to heal them, though it was quite hard seeing as they were still flying in the air. I am fine, but that single attack he landed on us was really strong. He isn't the same Issei we played with when we were younger, Rias. He is a dragon now. Sona spoke with a sense of seriousness to her, something that Rias could see as this was not how she had expected this to go. He was many times stronger than she remembered, and all this along with last month's worth of surprises, it was starting to get weird for her. First Azazel's Prosail, then that monster and now Issei's unknown strength being shown off. Why are all these things happening? Rias wondered, but she did get to muse on this thought before Akeno pushed her out of the way of a giant spiraling purple flame. They crashed and landed on the ground below. Sanji was the first to stand up and began to help his team up. Rias was helped up by Akeno a bit after. They went to see how bad the damage was, but saw that only they and Sona, Sanji, Tsubaki and Momo were still standing. Asia had been roasted and taken away with the same kind of magic as they would use at a raiding game. Rias also saw green particles flying up from the ground from where Kiba, Zenobia, Gasper and Kaneko used to be. He defeated them all. So easily Tsubaki started at Issei's show of power. She and most of the girls were all frightened, even more so when they saw him slowly slithering towards them, his two giant purple eyes staring them down as he came closer and closer. Rias, Sona, Akeno and Sanji were not as affected. The two first because they knew and had seen how strong he was, though they were quite shocked at how strong he had become. Akeno was also shocked, but also angry as she firmly believed he was behind her nightmares, along with killing her mother. It was enough of a drive to not buckle under, even if she really wanted to at this point. Sanji was scared. Very scared, but he was also admiring Issei Montress's strength. He felt weird to say the least. On one hand, he was afraid that Issei would use this strength against him, and on the other, he wanted to try and fight this strength of his. Rias, what do we do? Akeno asked, her slight anger evident, but also her fear of having to continue fighting him. Rias stepped forward slowly, stopping only when she stood at the front of the group, her face looking forward. We fight, or else we lose completely. Issei doesn't care if you're scared, if you're weak, if you're unable to fight. He only cares if he can fight you or not. So stop being afraid and meet him face to face. Rias said, though her words were not very convincing. She too sounded scared, her usual pride and friendliness gone. She closed her eyes, as the thought of losing was scary, as it would mean she no longer had control over him. That he was too strong. She knew he would never leave, but would she still be in control if he won? She didn't have time to ponder on these questions, as she could feel his breath hit her face. She opened her eyes, to be met with his own purple ones. Rias, surrender now while I still feel like it. He said, his voice sounding bored and unimpressed. He was unimpressed, the only thing that he thought deserved some credit was Sanji's punch, but that was it. Rias just used her powers as she knew they would work, or at least thought they worked. Sure, they work on him, but not in his current state. Normally they're unbearable, but now they just hurt a bit. Never. On my name as the Gremory Eris, I will defeat Yo. Before the last could even be said, Rias was flung to the other side of the group by a strong gust of wind from Issei. He had blown a single time out of his snout. Give up now or else you will only lose more of your dignity than you already have. Issei said, enjoying the defeated faces of the people in front of him, though one of them still had the face of a fighter. Sanji. So my own purple can still stand and fight. I expected nothing less. Let's see what you do if I do this, as Issei thought, before his body began to release a form of mist from it, then out of said mist came Issei in his half-dragonic and half-humanoid form. He spread out his arms in an almost welcoming manner and was about to speak when he saw a crimson red star fly towards him. What's that? He barely got a word out before he was sent a meter or two back. He looked around him, not really understanding what had hit him, before he began to feel an unmistakable pain. He cried out in pain as he felt the damage of the attack begin to affect his body. The people still standing watched as Issei cried out in pain as the star-shaped wound on his chest. It wasn't very deep, but it had made him bleed a little bit. Sona wanted to make an attack now with the remaining people here, but before she could get a word out, Akeno and Sanji had already attacked. Akeno began to summon as much holy lighting as she could, while Sanji ran in with all of his sacred gear pieces on and just went to town with Issei's wounded body. left strike, high knee, left swing, double-handed over hammer slam, and knockback kicks. All the while that was happening, Rias had managed to crawl out off the wall she had been shot into. Did it work? She asked Sona, who was still fully understanding what she was seeing. I think so. But I can't believe you had that kind of attack. Or how we have turned a sure loss into a possible win. Sona said as she went over to Ria's side and supported her by holding an arm under her to keep her standing. Yeah. Me neither, but don't let your guard down yet. Begin attacking before he gets a chance to counterattack. Rias said, to which Tsubaki and Momo finally woke up from their daze and began to fire magic at Issei from the sides. The many attacks, strikes and magical and elemental attacks began to work, and it showed as Issei didn't have a chance to regain his footing or a chance to breathe. He was under a constant bombardment of attacks and it began to lead him to losing. He was in shock at how this had happened, he knew why he was losing, but he still couldn't fully understand it. Rias had an attack that was more powerful than just the base normal power of destruction he had been wiped by in the past. So powerful in fact, he was sure it could even hurt him in his true form, and a lot too. He was happy that his instinct screamed at him to grow scales on his chest as fast as it had, or else he would have had a much bigger hole in his body to take care of. These things combined made him admire his mate. But it also drove him mad as all heck, as he, a dragon and son of one of the strongest of his race, was right now no more than punching bag. And worst of all, a punching bag to devils of all races. The one race dragons have a long and violent history with, even more than the newer inhabited races who have moved to the underworld in the past. This single fact made him angry, mad, and it made his pride of his race demand him to do something about it. But how was he going to that when he was the one on the receiving end? He couldn't fight back as he didn't get a chance to. He had taught Sanji to never let an opponent have a chance to rest or catch their breath as it could lead to one's own defeat. He knew Sona would use everything in her arsenal to stop him from dodging out of Sanji's attacks or retreat at all. And he knew that whatever Akeno was cooking up was going to hurt almost as much as that crimson star Rias fired at him earlier. And Rias had that star and he didn't know if she could use it more than that time. What? What should I do? I can't fight back. I am going to lose at this rate unless another punch from Sanji landed clean on the side of his head, making him fall over and landing on the ground with a hard bump. Akeno now. Rias shouted, her voice almost trembling with anticipation at the thought of betting Issei when he had been at his strongest. Yes, Rias-sama. Taste the holy lighting I gained from my father, Ritara. Akeno shouted as the crackling sound of thunder and lightning began to dive at Issei. Though the only thing Issei heard from that whole sentence was not the mention of a very Leffiad element known as holy lightning, nor her lessened hate of her own father. But the use of his real name, the name he was given by the being he saw as no more than a mindless monster. And saying that name was the only and most hated thing he ever got from him, as it meant, at least to all who heard, that he was the son of Vritra. Before the lightning hit his aura spiked as he roared out to her. Akeno Himejima. The lightning drowned him out and soon all sight of him was gone as well, as only giant stakes of lightning could be seen dancing in air. Rias, Sona, Tsubaki and Momo all breathed a sigh of relief as the fight and test was finally over. Akeno looked at her handiwork with pride as she crossed her arms feeling good about herself. But Sanji didn't. He was standing by with his guard still up as he had learned through his tough few but long felt weeks with Issei that the one thing you don't do is call him by that name. No matter what you do, never call him that name as it will have a terrible outcome than most can foresee. Even if it doesn't show like in his fight with Volley, it still makes him mad and makes him act outside of the rules he normally has. Even if he is a wild card most of the time, he still has some rules, those mainly being him showing off. And like he had feared, it came to pass. In a single moment he felt a punch of steel hit his chest, it would have killed him if not for the magic Azazel had put in place for this test. The others all stood silently and watched as out of the dust and through the green particles that used to be Sanji came a fully scaled Issei. His hair was long, longer than Akeno's with purple and black strands making up most of it. His eyes glowed like crystals in the dark, but instead of a happy and nice purple, it was a sinister one instead. His arms and legs were longer and had a more beast-like build than before. His hands no longer had fingers, but instead claws that were all sharper than most swords and much stronger than any hammer. His tail was swaying behind him in a calm manner, its many spikes down it moving a bit too, as if they were no more than feathers. And the very end of it, a spearhead but much deadly. This was what they thought they had to fight in the beginning, a human-sized monster with dragon-like strength and power. Not the gigantic snake that was his true form, which had powers they couldn't even hope to fight against. But now that said form stood before them, they were not feeling confident and sure of themselves. They felt fear, and a truly great fear at that. Here stood a member, even if lesser than his peers, of the strongest races of all time. A race no culture, faction, mythology nor being has been able to fight or win against without great loss. There is always a dragon, and it is always at the top, even if the prideful gods deny its strength. Even if the odoidecumens deny its existence. Even if world-ending beings think them lesser. They will always stand on top as they hold true and unmatchable power, and they have just made one of said beings very, very mad. Luckily before he could ever do any real damage, he fell over from all of the holy lightning he had been hit by earlier. He was still a devil after all, even if only by a small bit. Time skip, Underworld, Gremory Mansion. Rias Gremory, along with her one remaining peerage member, teleported into the entrance hall of the Gremory Mansion. Azazel, Sirzechs and her parents all stood there waiting for them, and they had a face of both joy over them beating the final test, but also sadness that it might have gone too far. Issei had been very close to killing each of them, at least at the end where he went slightly mad. An uncomfortable silence lay in the grand hall, the only thing that could be heard was the slow breathing of the many powerful beings, a small winces from the two younger women from their bruises and wounds they suffered. Azazel was the first to speak, hoping to congratulate them and make an attempt to say he was sorry, as he had not imagined Issei would go mad at the end of the battle. Great job kids, you beat one of the strongest dragons. No, never mind that, you passed your test and have now been relieved of my training, for the time being. Azazel tried to sound somewhat joyous, but it didn't help much with mood or on the two last standing members of Rias Gremory's peerage. He stroked his goat and began to speak again in a more humble manner. I am sorry that I put you kids through that. I had hoped Issei wouldn't go that far. I am sorry, I take responsibility. He bowed to them. They both seemed shocked by his actions, the same went for the rest of the currently present Gremory family. He slowly stood up straight again, looking serious and not his normal smug face. Rias stepped forward as she finally felt she could talk again. She felt that her parents or Azazel were disappointed in her, since she basically lost, or at least that's how it was meant to be. It's okay. We're okay and I thank you for putting up that magic around the area we fought in, if you hadn't, then we would have been in real trouble. Rias spoke back, bowing as well. Akeno did the same, but was less respectful about it. The moment was short-lived, as down the hall the sound of angry hissing and light footsteps could be heard nearing the entrance hall. Then getting closer and closer until it seemingly went down a different hallway instead of through the door to where everyone else was sort of waiting. What was that? Asked Rias, her sense still not being fully working yet, making her not really able to tell who those two were, though she had an idea to who it could be. I asked Graphia to take Issei down to his room for the rest of the summer, seeing as Azazel's idea has, even though not officially, backfired and ended with you and your peerage getting hurt. Sirzechs said, though sounding a bit unhappy about this outcome, as he and the rest of the family saw Issei as an adoptive member. It pained them to see him being locked up and to punish him, but they had to do it or else he would be unruly and of course create more problems. I understand brother. I mean Lord Lucifer-sama. May I and Akeno go and see my peerage? Rias asked, her voice playing a sad and hurt tone to fool the others from her inner voice, which was happy that she won in the end. Even if it didn't really feel like it. Sirzechs only nodded, moving to the side as he still had some business to discuss with Azazel. Rias, Akeno and Rias' parents walked by him and out the double doors and down the hallway towards the medical wing of the mansion. Only Sirzechs and Azazel were left behind in the room. The mood was evidently bad, as both of these great men had not foreseen this outcome. They had both expected Issei to win and only do enough damage to knock them out. But that attack on Sanji would have been an instant death if not for Azazel's quick reaction and pulling him out just before his body took the true damage behind Issei's punch. What happened out there, Azazel? I thought you said he was able to do this and not cause this kind of mess. Sirzechs asked. His friendly tone was gone and in its place was the voice of an angry older brother. Azazel could already tell where this was going and knew he couldn't talk himself out of this with a new promise or deal like before. He had made a deal with Sirzechs, or rather the lord and lady of the Gremory household, to try having Issei out of his chains and prison for longer periods of time. Sirzechs had agreed to it after his parents had talked it over with him. Azazel would put him to use as a training instructor for Sanji and place him underground far away from devil or dragon living settlements so that if he did go on a rampage he wouldn't hurt too many. And if everything worked out, then he could spend more of his time outside of his prison with his adoptive family, something Sirzechs, Rias and their parents wanted. It was a perfect deal for all parties, but Sirzechs had to make one condition, as he knew what Issei could do. If he went too far just once, the deal was off. I don't know Sirzechs. He had behaved himself, followed the rules you and I made for this deal, and didn't hurt anyone more than he needed to. But it seems that he wasn't ready to let go of his hatred of his father, seeing as that probably led to this whole mess we're in now. Azazel answered, looking away to avoid eye contact and also to think on what he heard and saw through his monitor. Sirzechs sighed heavily before speaking. I see, well I guess I can't fault you for not knowing how deep his hatred goes. Azazel looked back at Sirzechs with confusion. He thought he did know, it was pretty obvious to anyone who spent more than a day with him. I don't follow what you're saying, I have seen how deep this hatred of his goes and I just saw another show of it. Azazel answered back, only to earn a sad chuckle from Sirzechs, who began to walk into the middle of the huge room. Stopping when he reached the middle of it, standing right below a beautiful chandelier made of gold and rubies. No you don't Azazel, not fully at least. What you have seen is only the part he shows off when he is consumed by his anger, which happens too easily sadly. No, his real hatred stems from his name, his birth name and what it means to him and all around him. Sirzechs said, as he reached up with his left hand. He opened it slowly, in turn it began to form a crimson ball in the air between his fingers. You see, much like how me and my family are seen as the Gremory thanks to our crimson hair. He is seen as the son of Vritra thanks to his birth name, as his name means this in New Dragonic, as well in Satan's tongue. He uses a different name to hide this from the world and he uses a different last name to hide his connection to us. Sirzechs spoke. The bowl in his hand began to form itself into the shape of a young man. He hides himself away from these things as on one hand, he sees his connection to us as bad for us. And on the other hand, he hates to be seen as no more than the son of Vritra, for reasons my family and I have still yet to discover to this day. Sirzechs explained. The young man of Grimson, that used to be a ball, had now turned into a small replica of Issei himself. Sirzechs smiled friendly at the form of him, the form smiling back at him. Azazel was a bit stunned to hear all this. He thought he hated Vritra for other reasons, or because people just saw him as another Vritra. And that he even chose to throw away or at least hide his real name. He had felt this way at one point, when he had been cast out he wanted to throw away his last name, but took it back the day his own dad died. He is quite like Rias in that way. Wanting people to see him as someone, instead of a part of something. Sirzechs said, before closing his hand again, making the small Issei disappear. Sirzechs looked back towards Azazel, who hid his head for the first time in a long time, not thinking about anything. I see this little history lesson was too much for you old man, he. But I felt you needed to know it, since you will no doubt try to bring him out of his current and almost endless prison, that is his past. Sirzechs said before beginning to walk out of the room, holding still a much friendly smile then before the conversation started. When he closed the door behind him, Azazel finally woke up from his stunned state. He looked around the room, noticing a red glow come from the chandelier above him. In one of the rubies, the biggest of them all, stood the form of Issei. He looked happy, friendly and held no anger in him for his father. He smirks as he sees this, an obvious request from Lucifer himself to help save his little brother from destroying himself with all of his inner hate. You cheeky brats, making an old man like me work so much, he. Don't worry, I will find a way to help him, I promise on my father's soul. Chapter 14. A super stray. Time skip, underworld Gremory territory. Below the many beautifully decorated halls and luxurious rooms of the Gremory mansion lies a dungeon of sorts. With its long and narrow hallways, hopeless cells and fear-inducing rooms, it was to say not the most welcoming place in this mansion of glamour and beauty. It had been built a little over 150 years ago as a sort prison and job for one of the children of the Gremory house, namely Rias Gremory or Issei Imprisoned. It had been built for him so that he could have a role in the family, as he was not a high-class devil so he couldn't get a peerage, nor could he take over as a new heir to the Gremory by the virtue of him not being a full-blooded devil. So he was given the title of Dungeon Keeper, as his adoptive parents and older brother found his abilities, even from a young age, to perfectly match with the role. So when he was old enough, they gave him full rights and authority in the dungeon. He was about 6 years old by human standards when this happened. Though when the next heir, or rather heiress to the Gremory family was born, his role soon changed from Dungeon Keeper to Guardian Dragon for the little Rias. His love was much like Sirzechs in the beginning, that of an older brother Siskin, but it slowly over time morphed into something else. It changed so much that when Rias was given her evil pieces, he offered himself as her first piece and left behind his other roles. But then here comes the question, what became of his dungeon? It became his own personal prison after an aggressive change in both personality and how he acted towards those around him. So he was chained up there for most of the time, only being let out after Sirzechs had given Rias her Lord and Lady Gremory approval. His time in there only halted his progressively more aggressive personality, it didn't stop it, and so every time he was let out, he seemed to be more and more evil. After the whole final test thing Azazel had planned, where Issei almost killed Sanji just with his bare fist, Issei was unsurprisingly placed in his chains again. Grafia had to do it, much to both parties' dismay as neither of them very much liked the other. At least they respected each other for the sole nittiction of both being from a rather dark background, at least with family names and such. So after Grafia had chained him up with all 110 chains, she left Issei to himself in the silence of the dark. It had been hours since he had been put in chains, and he was just sitting on his bed and waiting for something to happen. His body had been forcefully changed back into his human form, making his current self very easily damaged by the magic inside of the chains, so no transforming as it would set off the magic and maybe ruin his arms and body for a very long time. Well. I guess I should have seen this coming, I really am an idiot if all it takes to make me angry is for someone to say my name. Issei thought as he hung his head over in defeat. I'm pathetic. Wouldn't you say so too, Drake? Me the strongest hatchling of all time and I can't even hold back my own anger. He spoke out loud to no one really, only really mentioning Drake's name in the slight hope he would say something to him. He didn't. Issei just laughed sadly as he kept his head down, not seeing the ball of fire closing in on him. He did begin to hear the footsteps of the person but couldn't smell or sense who it was. He couldn't smell them because of the stench in this place and he couldn't sense them since he wasn't allowed to use magic in these chains. Who's there? Is that you, Azazel? Sirzechs. Then before he could speak his adoptive mother's name, the person spoke out to him. Issei, my dear sweet boy, are you okay? Asked Asia as worry could be heard in her voice. Her walking began to pick as she began to semi-run over to him. Issei smiled a bit, thanking either one of the dragon gods that his mother had come to see him and also cursing them for making her see him in this state. I am fine mother, just got a bit beat up after I hope I didn't burn you too much. He tried to keep his voice in a neutral state but felt it was too much as he knew he had really fucked up this time. Asia came closer, only standing a few feet away, trying her best to look for any wounds but found none as Issei only got emotional damage, not physical. I'm fine, I am a dragon too, at least not as much as you or your father. Asia spoke sweetly, not realizing her words hurt her son. She came closer to him, holding out a hand and putting on his chin, moving his head up to see hers. His eyes widened a bit when saw her face covered by bandages, making him close his eyes almost as soon as he saw it. What's wrong, Ratara? Oh, I know, I am a little bit hurt, but I am okay. You could never hurt me, you're just like your father in that way. She spoke with a soothing tone, but not soothing enough for Issei. But he did hurt you. And I did too. He whispered. Asia only heard mumbles but could tell, from the few words she could understand, that he knew of something she didn't. What do you mean by that, dear? Please tell me, so I can help you with, or maybe. Issei turned his towards her, his eyes transforming into silt, setting off the chains to begin burning his neck. But he did. How don't you remember this? He killed you before I was born. Issei yelled out, his voice sounding hurt and pained. Asia looked at him confused and shocked that he would say something like this. But she wanted to help him, even if it meant having to hear her son speaking ill of her husband. I don't think you're thinking clearly, sweetie, and I don't think you should say stuff like that about your father. But I want to help you, so please try to explain yourself. What did you mean by your father killing me before you were born? Asia asked. Issei just looked at her shocked when he now realized that she had forgotten or maybe just didn't know. Issei just kept looking at her blankly as he was trying to understand or think of an answer to why she didn't remember this. He took in a deep breath before exhaling. He looked up to her, their eyes meeting. Her emerald green and his purple human eyes. When I had just become aware of my sacred gear, I had a vision of sorts. Maybe calling it a memory is more accurate, but I saw the scene of you two standing in front of my egg. It was the day I was supposed to have been born. Issei said, his voice already laced with slight fear at telling this. Asia though was silent, only nodding as to tell him to continue. You both stood in front of my egg, both showing your affection and discussing something, maybe my name, I don't know. But before I could be born, that monster killed you and ate you right in front of my egg. I had been awaking at that moment, but I had still yet to leave my egg. Issei said, looking up again to see how she had reacted. She was crying as in her eyes seemed to be a sort of remembrance or regained memory of this. She fell down on her knees as her tears began to come falling out like a waterfall. She looked straight ahead at the wall behind Issei, while Issei kept looking at her, hoping she would say something. Though what she did do was something he didn't expect. Issei, make me into Asia Argento. I don't want to be. I don't want you two monsters in my head. She cried out as fear, anger and horror suffered on her face. Issei was stunned by this. His own mother had just said she didn't want anything to do with him. That she saw him as no more than a monster. His eyes became blank as a more dull purple began to take the place of his usual purple eyes. Asia, at the lack of him answering her, stood up and slapped him on his cheek with all the force she could muster. It didn't hurt Issei, but it also did at least on the inside. The one good thing in your life, you monster. I never wanted this, so you better clean up this mess. Asia screamed at him as she slapped him again. Issei just looked at his mother as she unleashed her fear, anger and rage on her beloved son. She hates him, she hates his father for what he did to her. So why did she hate him too? Was it just because he was his son? Do it, Ratara, at least then you'll be less like your father. Asia screamed as she kicked him in the face. His body was shaking as a bubble of emotion was beginning to build up and force its way out of him. He slowly stood up, the chains rattling as he did. Asia stepped back, fear written all over her face, as flashbacks of that day came to her, as this whole scene, at least to her, felt like that day. Issei reached up with one hand, holding onto one of the chains on his neck, clenching his hand around it so hard it began to shake. His emotions were beginning to come out and he didn't want to be here when it happened. His body began to transform, making him feel immense pain. Asia began to step back, scared she was going to be killed again, like before. Issei had no emotions on his face, only an unbelievable sadness in his eyes. The chains broke, setting off many alarms in the mansion. He stood still for a few seconds before staring emotionlessly at his mother. He then looked up towards the roof of the dungeon before his body began to transform into his true form. His aura blew out, destroying the walls and roof of the dungeon. He began to get bigger and bigger. He roared out with all of his rage, hate and sadness. The mansion was beginning to shake just from his aura alone. He then looked at Asia one last time, her body frozen with fear. He looked up again, before flying upwards, destroying the ground and the entrance hall of the mansion, scaring many of the servants as the giant body of a dragon flew right by them and out of the roof and into the air above. The guards couldn't do anything, as before they even got in the air themselves, he had flown off to only Satan knows where. Rias, Akeno, Azazel, Grafia, Lord Zeoticus and Lady Venelana all stood and viewed this whole disaster from a different side of the mansion. No one said a single word, only the distant roar of Issei and the crying and yelling of the many servants could be heard. The silence was only broken when Venelana fell on her knees and began sobbing. Her husband Zeoticus tried to help her to the best of his ability. Grafia, seemingly without getting approval, sprinted off to find her own son, hoping he hadn't been caught in this mess. Rias was sad that she had just lost her strongest piece, as well as her plaything and her older brother. The last bit was only felt slightly. Akeno didn't know what to feel, should she be happy, angry, or sad. She didn't really know, and so she kept a straight face. Azazel walked closer to the window as he inspected Issei's body and sensed his power. He was unsure of how he was supposed to proceed with his secret deal with Sirzechs, or if he even should, as judging by the direction Issei was going, he would end up in the wasteland before anyone in the devil territory would get to him. The red magical circle, bearing the new Lucifer emblem, was formed in the room behind the group. Out of it came an obviously angry Sirzechs as his aura was leaking out of him, enough to make the air around him destroy itself. What happened here? He asked, no longer being an older brother or model son, but a leader. His parents couldn't speak as they were still unsure themselves, and Rias and Akeno were caught up in their own thoughts. So Azazel was the only choice left. Time skip, underworld devil territory. In a giant and very grandiose building on the outskirts of Lilith, the devil capital, a grand party was being held there. The devil youth's party to be exact, where all of the young heirs and heiresses would show up, say what their desire is in front of the devil kings and the devil council. Then after would a rating game tournament begin to see who was the strongest youth among them. But before the tournament rankings were announced and after the youths had spoken about their desires, there was a party. Many tables with high-class food, drinks and other such things stood all around the luxuriously decorated hall. The grand windows, which gave a beautiful view to a surrounding forest, had been offered it with different designed curtains, namely were the icon of the 4 devil kings, the devil councils and the family emblems of the different heirs and heiresses' families. One of those families being the Gremorys, though only Lord Zeoticus and Rias Gremory had come, as Lady Venelana had fallen ill. Though this was more of a mask or lie to hide the disaster that happened only 2 days earlier. Rias and her peerage stood in the hall, over at one of the tables, though none of them looked very chipper. Rias had to fake a smile most of the time, and when she wasn't doing that she looked angry. Akeno was still not totally sure what to feel, and so kept up her straight face, hiding it with her kind smile. Kiba, Zenobia, Kaneko and Gasper just looked normal as they weren't as attached to him and frankly were happy he was gone. Though Asia, she was different. She seemed like a different person most of the time and whenever someone mentioned Issei, she would have a horrified face. They didn't know she had been the root cause of this, nor what kind of relationship Issei had to the person behind Asia's voice. They had all noticed this, even Rias, though she had to have it told to her by Akeno, so they all tried to help in some way as she seemed to have taken this whole thing rather hard. Rias sighed before turning towards her peerage, her face no longer holding a smile, but a tired one instead. I wish we could leave soon, my face is killing me from smiling so much. Puh, you okay Asia? Rias asked as she noticed Asia staring off in a random direction. Rias couldn't see her face, but Gasper and Kaneko could and they saw her looking terrified. Kaneko looked towards the place Asia was looking at, becoming confused when she saw Sona and her peerage coming towards them. Rias and the others also noticed where she was looking and become even more confused. When the other peerage came close enough, with Sona, Tsubaki and Saji at the front, Asia silently backed away behind Zenobia. Both Sona and Rias noticed this, both wanting to know what was so scary for her to behave like this. Rias. Sona said, wanting to still seem courtly before she could ask about what Asia was scared of. Sona. Rias said back, her face now holding a more genuine smile than before. Interesting dream you have, to become the champion of the rating games, though it might be just a bit childish, wouldn't you say? Sona said, trying to be a bit funny, but from the lack of giggles and tired faces, could see this wasn't the time. Sorry, I wanted to liven the mood. You have all been kind of off for the whole night. Sona said, pointing out the obvious. Yes, well, when? Wait, have Serafal-sama told you? Rias asked, to which Sona nodded, making Rias continue. Okay, then I don't know what to tell you, as it should be pretty obvious. Rias said, to which Sona nodded again. You're correct, but it does make me sad to know an old friend has chosen this kind of path in life. Do you know why he ran away? Sona asked, with a small pitch of pity in her voice, as even if it didn't seem like it, Issei and Sona used to be friends when they were kids. Rias shook her head, before sighing deeply. No one knows, he just began to leak an awful, what happened to Issei Rias-sama? Please, I need to know, he is my friend. Sanji suddenly interrupted. He sounded very worried, enough to make Sona not punish him, at least not now. Asia looked afraid when he suddenly spoke up, hiding away more behind Zenovia. I thought everyone in your peerage knew about this, but it seems not. Rias said, her voice becoming a bit more calm than her earlier one. Yes, well he was knocked out till this morning, and I didn't have time to tell him before this whole thing began. Sona explained as Sanji kinda looked annoyed, which he was as no one had told what had happened. Oh, can one of you tell me already? He demanded, but not with getting a pair of threatening eyes from Sona, as she didn't want other nobles to think she didn't teach her peerage anything. It's alright, he deserves to know. Rias said. After a second or two, Sona just sighed before Rias began to tell Sanji what had happened. How Issei almost killed him, how he was put in an underground prison, and how he suddenly broke out of it and flew off into the wastelands of the underworld. So, now Sirzechs and Azazel are working together on finding him and bring him back before he becomes a stray, or else he would be classified as a super stray, the first of its kind. Rias said after finishing her long explanation, making Sanji fearful of what might happen to Issei. The others, besides Sanji, who had already heard all of this, still felt a few chills go up their spines at the thought. What if Issei did become a stray? Would he really become so strong? I thought most of them thought, as the power he had in their test began resurfacing, making them believe this to be a likely possibility. So what are we to do if we meet him or see him? Sanji asked curiously. Rias raised an eyebrow at his question. Well, you would be advised to contact Sona or Tsubaki so that they can call in stronger reinforcements. Rias answered. Sanji just looked lost, as her words seemed to have crushed what little hope he had of talking with Issei again and finding a better way to solve this. Vritra could see the thought Sanji was having and felt he didn't fully understand why his host would want to do this, besides his still not fully realized crush. At least that's what Vritra would call for now. But while Vritra was overseeing the conversation between the devils, he noticed one of them. A blonde-hair girl with emerald green eyes standing behind a taller girl with blue hair. He could feel something oddly familiar about her, like an old friend or family member you hadn't seen in years, then when you saw them again they had changed into a different person. Asia moved her head out to the side of Zenovia's torso, revealing her face as Akeno had asked why she was hiding. At the side of her face, her voice and that aura she was giving off, Vritra couldn't stop himself from calling it out. Suddenly Sanji's sacred gears summoned themselves, raising his power by at least 50%, making many of the guests and his friends look at him surprised by his sudden action. But before he could say anything, Vritra made his official debut as Reawaken, along with something else. Darling. My dear Asia. My dear sweet mate, you're alive. Oh how I have missed you every day in this damned prison of mine, my sweet darling Asia. Vritra roared out of the sacred gear, confusing everyone and scaring Asia half to death at the sound of her husband. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.